Hi, I'm Elise. My sister once looked at a gift I made by hand and laughed, called it cheap in front of everyone. But that wasn't the worst part. The real blow? She planned her dream wedding in the house we inherited together, while secretly trying to take my name off the deed. I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased. Ever been the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, only to realize they counted on that silence to take everything from you? What would you do if your own family treated you like a footnote? Let me tell you what I did. The house didn't smell like home anymore. It had the same cedarwood beams, the same whitewashed porch, but the air inside was different. Overly floral, too polished, like it had something to prove. Someone had lit candles that smelled like lavender mixed with citrus. Celeste's idea of elegance. I hadn't been in that house in months, maybe longer. And today, I wasn't there to feel nostalgic. I was there because my name was still on the deed, even if it had long since been erased from conversation. The front door was already open when I walked up. Guests floated in and out, all pastels and polished shoes, holding glasses that clinked even when no one said anything meaningful. I stepped inside, holding the small wrapped box close to my chest, trying not to crush the ribbon I'd tied that morning. "There you are," Celeste said, sweeping toward me like a designer storm cloud. "Perfect timing. We were just about to toast." She kissed the air beside my cheek, already pulling away before my hand could settle on her shoulder. Her voice dropped to a hush. "Try not to make it awkward, okay?" I gave a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it." People were standing in small groups, every conversation sprinkled with name-dropping and wedding talk. I spotted Nolan near the back of the room, holding a glass of something with bubbles. He nodded politely at me, but the kind of nod you give someone you've heard about, not someone you know. My palms were starting to sweat. I gripped the box tighter. "Let's do presents now," someone chirped. Vanessa, maybe. Celeste's friend from college, who once said my art looked very emotionally brave. Celeste clapped her hands and motioned toward the side table, now covered in glossy gift bags and envelopes with metallic script. "Start with the small one," she said, her gaze landing on my box with the kind of smile that doesn't belong on a face but in a mirror. I stepped forward and placed it in her hands. "I made it myself," I said, my voice steady. "Oh?" She blinked at me like I'd said I'd built a house out of toothpicks. She peeled the paper back and opened the lid. Inside was a hand-stitched embroidery piece, our family tree, down to the details. I'd worked on it for weeks, matching thread colors to old photos, choosing a frame that wouldn't overwhelm the stitches. Every name had been placed with care, even hers. She stared at it. Her lips twitched. "Oh my," she said, then looked up at the room. "This looks so cheap." The words hit harder than they should have. The room broke into a light ripple of laughter. Polite, restrained, but loud enough. Nolan let out a half chuckle, then sipped his drink to hide the rest. Celeste shook her head with mock pity. "You know there's a registry, right? But this is sweet, I guess." I said nothing, just nodded and stepped back. My face felt hot, my ears ringing, but I kept that smile glued on like armor. I spotted a couple exchanging glances, clearly unsure if they were witnessing a joke or something meaner. The embroidery lay on the table, sideways, the frame catching too much light. A few minutes later, Celeste clinked her glass. "I just want to say thank you all for being here. This home, this legacy, has been in our family for generations. My mother, my grandmother, even great-grandmother stood on these floors. And now, I get to start a new chapter here, with the man I love." She raised her glass. "To family tradition." Everyone toasted. Except me, because I knew what wasn't said. The part where I'd helped save this house after Dad passed, when Celeste didn't return my calls until the probate lawyer said it might get liquidated. The part where I'd cashed out my retirement to cover back taxes, while she was off at a yoga retreat in Sedona. But sure. Legacy. My name didn't come up once, not when she spoke of generations, Not when she thanked everyone for their support. I could have been a guest, or a caterer, or a mistake someone forgot to uninvite. She finished her toast, Nolan kissed her cheek, and the crowd clapped like they'd just watched a trailer for something they didn't plan to see. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just long enough to feel the space shrink around me. No one turned. No one noticed when I left. I walked back to my car with the keys already in hand. When I shut the door, the sound felt louder than it should have, like closing something that couldn't be opened again. I didn't cry. That would have been too easy. I didn't yell. That would have let her win. I just sat there, staring through the windshield, looking at the house I once called mine. Not by ownership, but by memory. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to walk back inside. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had already dipped below the rooftops. The heat of the day clung to the sidewalks, like it refused to let go. But inside my place, it was quiet. Too quiet. I kicked off my flats near the door and placed the untouched slice of engagement cake on the counter. I hadn't had the appetite for it at the party, and I still didn't now. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the sink and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with myself. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, it sinks into your chest. A breeze nudged the curtains near the back window, and I could hear the faint rumble of a car somewhere down the block. My phone buzzed, but I didn't look at it. I already knew it wasn't Celeste, or Mom, or anyone that would say what I needed to hear. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop, more out of habit than anything else. A notification popped up. Celeste had shared the party video link with the family group thread. The subject line read, "For the memories?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, I'd be in it. Maybe she remembered something that mattered. I clicked play. It opened with a sweeping shot of the house, the camera moving through each freshly polished room, soft piano music playing under the footage. The next frame jumped to Celeste and Dad, fishing off the dock, back when we still had the lake house. Then her prom, her first wedding, her graduation. Our mother hugging her tightly outside a church. Not once did I appear. I watched the entire thing, 7 minutes, 23 seconds, and my face never showed up. Not in the group photos, not in the candids, not even in the background. I refreshed the page. Thought maybe it was an error. Maybe there was a second video. I searched the link history. Nothing. She'd curated a history that erased me completely. Like I was a footnote she'd decided wasn't relevant anymore. I leaned back in my chair, blinking hard. Not because I was going to cry, but because my eyes had dried out from staring too long without moving. My phone buzzed again. A message this time, from the planner probably. I ignored it. When I went to put the laptop away, I noticed something under the pile of mail on the entryway table. A tri-folded brochure, creamy paper with gold embossing. It looked like something printed for a museum. At the bottom, in elegant serif font, "The Catherine Legacy Home, preserved by Celeste and family." I stared at it for a moment before flipping it open. Inside was a narrative, more polished than truthful, about the remarkable women of the Catherine line, with Celeste listed as the current steward of the estate. No mention of me, not even in the smallest print. There was a page on family contributions, too. Grandfather's military record, Celeste's charity events, my mother's civic awards. Again, nothing about the years I handled the estate taxes or the summer I refinished the floors myself when we couldn't afford contractors. All of it vanished, overwritten. I pressed the brochure flat against the table and ran my hand across it like it might change under my touch. It didn't. Instead, a memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 18. Celeste had just graduated college, and Mom had thrown her a big party in the backyard. The day after, I stayed behind to clean. Scrubbed the grill, hosed down the patio, threw out soggy paper plates. Later that night, I opened the fridge and found a small cake box shoved to the back. "Happy birthday, Elise!" written in faint icing, tilted from the car ride over. No candle, no card. That night, I told myself maybe they were just tired. Maybe they forgot the date. Maybe I hadn't reminded them enough. That's how it starts. The excuses you build to make silence feel less cruel. I looked at the brochure again. The story she'd built, the version of our family she'd handed out to vendors and friends, and probably emailed to investors as some charming backstory. She'd cut me out without ever lifting a pair of scissors. I closed the laptop gently and set it aside. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry, at least not in the traditional sense. What I felt was deeper, like realizing a photo had been doctored and you were the part edited out. I got up, pulled a fresh notepad from the drawer, and sat back down at the table. I opened to a blank page and began writing dates, memories, names. Not for anyone else, just for me. The time I met with the estate lawyer, the checks I wrote, the times I called the roofer, the weekend I drove 6 hours to get a deal on reclaimed wood for the downstairs hallway. I didn't need anyone to validate it, but I also didn't want to forget that it happened. They say history belongs to those who write it, so I started writing mine. The next morning, I woke up with a stiffness that had nothing to do with sleep. It settled somewhere between my shoulders, a quiet tension I couldn't stretch out. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because routine gives the illusion of order. My spoon clinked against the side of the mug louder than usual, or maybe it just felt that way in the silence. By late morning, I'd talked myself into driving over to Mom's. I packed some chicken soup in a glass container and wrapped it in a towel like I'd done so many Sundays before. Her apartment wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive across town, but today it felt like heading towards something I couldn't quite name. When she opened the door, she smiled like she hadn't forgotten anything, like last night's party hadn't happened. "Oh, Elise, come in," she said, stepping aside. I kissed her cheek and handed her the soup. She set it down on the counter and walked into the living room as if I wasn't standing there holding a conversation starter in my hands. I followed her slowly. She turned on the TV, some home renovation show where perfect strangers fixed other people's problems with sledgehammers and tile samples. We sat in that manufactured comfort for a few minutes before I cleared my throat. "I didn't stay long last night," I said, as neutrally as I could manage. She didn't look over. "It was lovely, wasn't it? Celeste really knows how to put on a show." A show. That was exactly what it was. I nodded slightly. It felt a little distant. That got her attention, barely. "Well, your sister has a lot on her plate right now. You know how she is, wants everything just right." "I noticed," I said, then paused. "I guess I just wasn't expecting to be left out of so much." She sighed. A long, practiced exhale. "Elise, sometimes it's better to let things go. Don't make this about you. It was her night." There it was. The line I'd heard more ways than I could count. Don't make this about you. The unspoken mantra of being the second daughter, the quieter one, the one who fills the cracks, but doesn't get her name carved into the stone. I forced a smile. "Of course." She patted my hand like I was being overly sensitive. "You've always been the strong one." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how often strength is used as a reason to ignore someone's absence. Later, while rinsing our dishes at the sink, I noticed a few papers tucked under her recipe stand. The top one had been folded in half, like someone meant to put it away but got distracted. I didn't mean to read it, at least not at first, but a phrase caught my eye. House Design and Problem Management. The email was a forwarded chain. Celeste had sent it to her wedding planner, and Mom had printed it. Why, I didn't know. The message read, "Don't worry about Elise. She's always been the quiet one. We'll manage her." Manage me. Like I was a spreadsheet, a pothole, a tricky headline in a family press release. I folded the email back the way I found it, my hands steady, but my chest hollowing out slowly, like a balloon losing air in a room where no one hears the hiss. We chatted for a little while longer, about the neighbor's cat, her latest book club pick. But I wasn't there anymore. When I got home, I placed the folded email next to my laptop. It sat there for a few minutes before I opened the shoebox in the closet. Inside were old cards and photos I hadn't looked through in years. One envelope, yellowed at the edges, had my name in Dad's handwriting. I opened it carefully. It was the card he gave me when I graduated college. I'd forgotten the words until I read them again. "You are the soul of this family, even if no one says it out loud." I sat there for a while, holding it between my fingers like it might fall apart if I let go. Then I pulled out a manila folder and labeled it, "In case I forget my worth." Inside, I placed the email, then the card, then the photo of me sanding the stairs back in 2009, the summer the house almost fell apart, and no one else had time to care. I didn't intend to use any of it, not yet. But something in me had shifted. Not a scream, not a fight, just a turning of the lock. They weren't preparing to confront me. They were preparing to erase me before I noticed it was happening. So I started preparing too. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't insomnia exactly, more like my mind kept pacing even while my body stayed still. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the manila folder I'd labeled the night before. By mid-morning, the sun was fully up, and the air had that heaviness Charleston carries before it decides whether to rain or just smother you with heat. I pulled out an old address book I hadn't touched in years. Flipping through the pages, I found Marshall's name still written in my father's blocky print. Marshall Reed, James's attorney, estate affairs, trustworthy, private. The note beside it wasn't mine. Dad must have written that sometime before everything went sideways. I called the number. It rang twice before an older male voice picked up. "Reed Law Office." "Hi, this is Elise Catherine. I was wondering if Marshall Reed still practices." There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Well, I'd certainly hope so, since you're speaking to him." I smiled despite myself. "Mr. Reed, I'm James's daughter." "Elise." "Of course." His tone shifted, warmth under control. "I haven't heard from your family in, what, over a decade?" "I know it's been a while," I said, fingers pressing the side of my mug. "I was hoping to meet, to ask a few questions." There was a pause, but not a hesitant one. "James always said you were the one who paid attention. Come by the office this afternoon if you can." By 2 o'clock, I was in his waiting room. It smelled like leather and lemon polish, the kind of place that hadn't changed decor since 1995, and wore that fact with pride. Marshall stepped out from his office and gestured me in. He looked older, his silver hair now entirely white, but his eyes were sharp. "I was sorry to hear about your father," he said as we sat. "Thank you. What can I help you with, Elise?" I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. "I just need to know what my rights are regarding the house." He nodded, stood, and walked to a filing cabinet behind him. He didn't need to look hard. He knew exactly where to go. He returned with a thick envelope and opened it slowly. "Your father was meticulous. He made sure everything was clearly outlined." He laid out a page in front of me. "Original deed, signed by your father. Ownership split 50-50 between you and Celeste." I stared at the page. My name, typed clean and official, stared back at me like a long-lost relative. It didn't just confirm I had a stake. It confirmed I'd been lied to for years. Marshall tapped the corner of the document. He insisted both daughters had equal stake. I remember him saying, "Celeste may be the star, but Elise is the spine." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I nodded once. "There's more," he said, pulling out a separate sheet. "This came in 2 years ago. A request to transfer the deed into sole ownership, Celeste's name only." He passed it to me. The county clerk's response was stapled behind it. "Request denied. Missing co-owner signature." She tried to cut me out. And failed. I didn't say a word for a full minute. Marshall watched me with the patience of someone used to long silences and heavy truths. Is it possible to sell my half? I asked finally. He leaned back. You can sell the whole thing. Both names are still valid. You're not tied to her consent unless a new contract supersedes this, which it doesn't. I nodded slowly. I'd like certified copies. Of course. He moved to the printer, and I took a breath. The kind you take when the air has weight, and you finally have enough strength to push against it. When he returned, I stood to leave. He handed me the envelope and said, Your father would have wanted you to have this, and not just because of paperwork. I nodded again, this time softer. Thank you. As I stepped out onto the street, the sun had dimmed behind a veil of clouds. The light was still there, but muted, like it knew not everything needed to shine to be seen. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. She'd built an entire world pretending I didn't matter, and yet here it was, in ink and official seals, proof I hadn't just mattered, I had rights. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a single punch, but I had the one thing that couldn't be ignored. Paper doesn't lie. It had been a week since I left Marshall's office with that envelope in my hands. 7 days of silence, of holding a piece of truth I hadn't shared with anyone, not because I was scared, but because power tastes different when you don't rush to use it. That Tuesday, I decided to visit the house. No text, no call. Just me, showing up under the pretense of checking in. After all, no one had officially told me I couldn't. The door code hadn't been changed. That alone told me everything. Inside, the place looked more like a showroom than a home. Soft jazz hummed from ceiling speakers. There were fresh flowers, white hydrangeas, Celeste's favorite, placed strategically around the rooms. The kitchen had been staged, with fake croissants on a white plate and a bottle of wine I knew neither of us ever drank. I stood there for a moment, absorbing it all. The wallpaper we'd chosen after Dad passed had been replaced. Light gray now, with gold accents. Very bridal magazine. Very not us. I wandered further in, slowly, my footsteps muffled by the new rugs. On the counter sat several design catalogs, fabric samples, and a stack of sticky notes with Ivana's handwriting. The wedding planner. Her bag was tossed casually on one of the dining chairs, as if she lived here now. I didn't touch a thing, not until I reached the stairs and looked up toward the second floor. My old room. It felt strange walking those steps again, like visiting a memory someone else had tried to rewrite. The door to my room was closed. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The walls were painted a sterile cream. My bookshelf was gone. The closet was filled with clear bins labeled coats, centerpieces, and emergency heels. On the wall was a taped copy of the floor plan, in red ink, guest coat room. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. This wasn't anger. This was confirmation. They had taken the one room that had still carried my shape and turned it into a closet for strangers. I walked back downstairs, and as I passed the front hall, I noticed an envelope with my name written on it. Handwritten, but not by anyone who cared. I opened it, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was a note, an apology, a conversation starter. It was a misdelivery. Inside were wedding planning notes. Celeste's notes, addressed to Ivana. My name came up only once. Feel free to remodel all areas except the front parlor and dining room. That's where the guests will take photos. Elise doesn't really use the upstairs anymore. I took a picture of the page with my phone, then folded the papers neatly and slid them back into the envelope. Let them think I never saw it. Let them keep assuming I was still asleep. On the way out, I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I simply walked to my car, started the engine, and let the heat from the windshield soak into my skin while I sat and thought. Back at my apartment, I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I'd been putting it off, not because I wasn't ready, but because I knew that once I started, there'd be no going back. I pulled up a browser, typed slowly, and found a contact form for a local private realtor. One I'd met once years ago when helping a friend relocate. They specialized in historic homes and confidential listings. In the inquiry box, I wrote, "Waterfront property, historic, motivated seller, discretion essential." I didn't name the address, not yet. But I knew they'd call. Homes like ours didn't sit long, not in Charleston, not with a backyard that kissed the marsh. When I hit send, I didn't feel guilt, I didn't feel fear, I felt calm. They had repurposed my room, my history, my presence, but they had no idea I'd already started repurposing the house. Not to get even, to get free. 3 days passed with no word from Celeste. No calls. No carefully worded emails. No surprise knock at the door. And I knew that silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. She was either pretending nothing had happened or planning her next move. I wasn't sure which was worse. On Thursday morning, I was steeping tea when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a neighbor or a package. It was Celeste. She stood on my front porch in white linen, her arms folded like she was about to deliver a warning, not a greeting. Behind her, Ivana lingered a few steps back, sunglasses still on despite the overcast sky. "Open the door, Elise," Celeste said, tight-lipped. "We need to talk." I didn't invite them in. I simply stepped aside. She took that as permission and breezed past me like she still owned the house and the air inside it. The planner followed, awkward and silent, clutching a sleek leather portfolio like it might shield her from the tension crackling in the room. "I got a call," Celeste began, turning to face me once I'd closed the door. "From someone in real estate. Said the house was being quietly marketed. Can you explain to me why my wedding venue is being listed behind my back?" I stayed calm. "Have you looked at the deed lately?" Celeste blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I walked to the hallway table, opened a drawer, and pulled out the certified copy Marshall had given me. I held it out without a word. She didn't take it, so I laid it gently on the entryway table between us. "Half of that house belongs to me," I said evenly. "Legally. Still. Always has." Ivana looked between us, clearly re-evaluating whether she should have come. Celeste crossed her arms. "This is petty, Elise. You're going to ruin everything over some technicality? This is my wedding." "No," I said. "This is our family home, and you're turning it into a photo shoot. That's not fair." "Neither is being erased," she scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I tilted my head slightly. "You're being entitled." We stood there in silence for a moment that stretched thin as wire. Then the door opened again. Nolan walked in, keys still in his hand. He stopped short when he saw all of us there. Celeste mid-argument, Ivana shifting uncomfortably, and me holding my ground. "I didn't realize there was a meeting," he said carefully. Celeste composed herself in seconds. "We were just clearing something up." Nolan turned to me. "Is this about the house?" I nodded once. Celeste interjected, her voice syrupy. "It's just a misunderstanding." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "It's not complicated," I said, handing Nolan the same document. "It's documented." He read silently. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes stopped on my name. Printed, legal, real. "You're co-owner?" he asked, more to confirm than question. "Yes," I answered, and she tried to transfer full ownership without my signature. The clerk denied it. Celeste's face hardened. "Why are you doing this? Out of spite?" "No," I said. "Out of necessity." Ivana finally broke her silence. "Should I step out?" "No," I replied, keeping my eyes on Celeste. "You might as well hear it." I turned slightly, my voice steady but colder now. "I've watched you claim credit for everything, from family history to this house to my silence. But here's the truth. You can't stage a wedding in a house you don't legally control. And you certainly don't get to erase me and expect me to stay quiet while you make a grand entrance on the very floorboards I paid to fix." Celeste laughed bitterly. "You've always had a flair for martyrdom." "No," I said. "I've just learned that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible, and I don't need your approval to matter." Nolan didn't say a word, but he folded the paper and handed it back to me, not her. That said more than any speech could. Celeste looked at him, then back at me, eyes sharp but uncertain. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She turned on her heel and left without saying another word. Ivana hesitated. "We'll be in touch," she said softly, before following her out the door. When it shut behind them, the house fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't hollow. This time, I'd filled it. I stayed in the foyer for a while after the door closed, listening to the echo of Celeste's heels fading down the steps, like thunder finally moving off in the distance. I didn't move, didn't sit, didn't even exhale. I'd said what needed to be said. The words hung in the air like smoke after a match strike. Not hot, not angry, just lingering truth. By the next morning, I had confirmation that our quiet battle had become a full-blown war. The envelope came via overnight courier. A pale gray folder inside bore the crest of a downtown law firm Celeste had used before, when she sued an old business partner for breach of contract and won. She didn't believe in consequences unless she was the one delivering them. Inside was a formal demand for mediation. "Disputed use of shared property," it said. I scanned the lines quickly. "Cease all sales activity, suspend the listing, refrain from contacting realtors or potential buyers." There was no signature from Celeste, but her fingerprints were all over it. Before I had time to digest it, my phone buzzed. "Hi, is this Elise Catherine?" a familiar voice asked. It was Marcy from the realty firm. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. We got a call this morning, someone claiming you didn't have legal authority to list the property. We've paused things for now." Of course she did. The same woman who ignored every bill I paid, every repair I made, now suddenly remembered we shared something. I thanked Marcy, told her I'd be in touch soon, then hung up. It took less than 24 hours for Celeste to strike, but I was done being caught off guard. That afternoon, I drove to my doctor's office. I'd known Dr. Ellis for over a decade. We didn't talk often, but he'd seen me through a few surgeries and an early cancer scare. He didn't ask why I needed a cognitive evaluation on paper. He just did it. When he handed over the notarized letter confirming my mental fitness and decision-making ability, he didn't press for details. "Just in case," I told him. He nodded once. "Some families don't understand quiet strength until it refuses to sit down." From there, I drove straight to Marshall's office downtown. I handed him the legal packet, the evaluation letter, and a copy of my response. "Do not let them make this about my stability," I told him. "She'll try to spin this as me unraveling. I want it clear and on record. I know exactly what I'm doing." Marshall flipped through the documents, his eyes narrowing. "She's playing hardball," he muttered, "but she overreached. Then let's show her what happens when she plays that way with the wrong sister." That night, I didn't sleep again. But it wasn't anxiety this time. It was clarity. Focused. Clean. The next morning, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, Silas pulled into the driveway. I hadn't called him. I didn't need to. He stepped out of his truck with a thin binder under his arm, and the same quiet determination I remembered from the day he helped me move out of my college apartment in a single afternoon, never asking for help, never expecting thanks. "I figured you'd need this," he said, handing over the file. Inside were archived property records from the city, every tax payment, maintenance receipt, and property upkeep bill under my name since Dad passed. 12 years worth. "In case they try to paint you like a visitor," he said. I looked up at him, my throat tight. "They always thought I wouldn't fight back." He shrugged. "They don't know you like I do." Marshall called 2 days later. "She's backing off," he said plainly. The documentation was clear. Her lawyer didn't expect that kind of preparation. "And the house?" I asked. "Still yours. The listing can resume. The venue is now legally compromised. Her contracts won't hold." I hung up the phone and set it gently on the table. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, like someone who had been leaning too long and finally found solid footing again. A few hours later, I got a message from an old family friend, Karen from Dad's side, the kind who called everyone Han and always wore too much perfume. Elise, I don't mean to pry, but Celeste's saying you've been having episodes, that you might be making impulsive decisions. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes and took a breath before replying. Everything is exactly as it should be, Karen, but thank you for checking. The first domino had fallen. She didn't just lose a house, she lost the script. By the time Saturday rolled around, the weather had turned almost mockingly perfect. Bright skies, no humidity, just enough breeze to make the marsh sparkle. It was supposed to be her day, Celeste's day, the one she had curated down to the scent of the soap in the guest bathrooms. Instead, the venue stood locked, cold, and completely silent. I wasn't there, but word traveled quickly. Guests began arriving around noon, some confused, others irritated. There were murmurs in the group chats, messages sent to coordinators, a few attempted calls to vendors. All went unanswered. Around 12:47 p.m., the planner sent out a text blast to every guest number on file. Due to an unforeseen legal complication with the venue, today's event is postponed. We deeply apologize for the inconvenience. That was it. No explanation, no relocation, just gone. I heard about it first from Silas, who had been walking past the venue on his way to meet a client nearby. He called me, not out of curiosity, but with a tone I hadn't heard from him since our 20s, measured, tight with something like disbelief. They were unloading flower arrangements when they got the word. The truck turned around. You should have seen Celeste's face. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. By late afternoon, the hashtags had started. Nothing massive, just enough to leave a digital bruise. Wedding fail, shattered venue gate, Shark Celeste crisis. A few boutique blogs picked it up by evening. A headline read, High-profile Charleston PR exec's wedding implodes over property dispute. The article mentioned an undisclosed legal error involving co-ownership. My name wasn't in it. Neither was hers. But the locals knew. And in a city like this, reputation moves faster than traffic. I stayed in. Cooked dinner without the TV on. Washed dishes slower than usual. Every now and then, I'd glance at my phone, not because I expected a call from her, but because part of me still lived with the reflex of waiting. Around 6:30, a family friend texted me. Was the venue situation really that serious? I replied. It was that real. Meanwhile, Celeste had apparently tried to salvage what she could by hosting a small reception at a nearby hotel lounge. Photos showed up online. A charcuterie spread, a champagne tower that looked sad without context, and guests dressed for an event that had already evaporated. One photo caught my eye. A framed embroidery sitting on a display table near the guest book. It was the one I'd made, the family tree. The same one she'd laughed at weeks ago, called cheap, in front of a room full of people. I stared at the image, squinting to see if the stitching was still intact after being mishandled. Under the picture, someone had commented, So sweet and personal. Celeste, did you make that? And there it was. Her reply, casual as a shrug. Oh no, that's from Elise. Just a little crafty thing she does. Etsy vibes. Etsy vibes. She didn't have to smear me anymore. She could just reduce me to something novelty level, an accessory to her aesthetic. Nothing dangerous, nothing meaningful. Just a woman who made things with thread while the rest of the world built real legacies. But real legacy doesn't fold when the paper arrives. Hers did. At some point that evening, Nolan left. I know this because Karen called, again. Said she saw him at the hotel lobby alone, sipping a bourbon, tie loosened. He looked distant. She tried to hug him for a photo, and he kind of stepped back. You could tell. Later, I heard what he told her before walking out. This wasn't a disaster, Celeste. It was a reveal. I didn't hear from him. Not directly. But that was fine. The beach was quiet that night, and I needed air that wasn't recycled by someone else's narrative. I took a walk by myself, my hands buried in my jacket pockets, the hem of my jeans dragging through the sand. Halfway down the shore, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It was the wedding invitation. The one that arrived 3 weeks ago, white gold embossed with embossed initials and a wax seal I never broke. I didn't open it. I never had. I stood at the edge of the water and let the wind tug at the corners of the envelope, just enough to feel the tension between my fingers and the waves. Then I let it go. No speech, no tears. Just salt air, the sound of retreating water, and the soft thud of something meaningless meeting the sea. I didn't ruin her wedding. I just stopped pretending it belonged to all of us. The envelope disappeared into the waves without resistance, and I didn't look back. I stayed on the shore until the tide began to crawl up toward my shoes, then turned and walked home with my hands in my coat pockets and my head clear for the first time in weeks. That was a month ago. The apartment I moved into afterward is nothing special by Charleston standards. 2 bedrooms, lots of light, creaky floors in just the right places. The walls are white for now, though I've taped a few swatches in the hallway, unsure whether I want soft blue or green-gray. The kitchen is small but clean, and the windowsill above the sink gets just enough sun to keep basil alive. I hosted a housewarming last weekend. Not a big event, just Silas, Marshall, and 2 old friends who still remembered what my name sounded like in a conversation. We had pie instead of cake, wine instead of champagne. Nobody made a toast. Nobody needed to. We laughed about the heater making strange noises, and someone brought a plant I didn't know how to take care of. It felt easy. Real. A painting I finished last spring hangs near the living room window. It isn't of the house. I don't think I'll ever paint that house. It's of the shoreline I walked that night, done in soft strokes and muted tones. It isn't meant to impress anyone. It just exists, like I do. Tuesday morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside, on a single sheet of notepaper, were the words, "I remember more than I ever said. I'm sorry for being silent when it mattered. No signature, but I didn't need one. I folded it carefully, slid it into the drawer next to my keys, and let it be. I didn't call her. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Some apologies weren't meant to rebuild anything. They were just acknowledgments, like flowers left at the edge of a grave. A few days later, I got a voicemail from Nolan. "I see you differently now," he said. "That's all I wanted to say." I deleted it without listening a second time. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need him to see me clearly anymore. I already did. Later that week, I framed 3 things and hung them in my hallway. First, the embroidery piece I had made for Celeste's engagement, this time reframed in oak, the stitching pressed smooth behind glass. Second, a copy of the letter Dad wrote me when I graduated college, the one I almost threw out years ago. Third, the certified copy of the house deed, my name clearly printed beside hers. I didn't frame them for spite. I framed them for remembrance. Not because I needed to prove anything to visitors. Honestly, most people will walk past them without a second glance. But because they remind me that what was real doesn't stop being real just because someone edits the narrative. I don't know what Celeste is doing now. I heard from someone that the hotel pulled out of her event partnership and that the firm she was consulting with politely paused their agreement. She hasn't contacted me, and I don't expect her to. I don't wish her harm, but I no longer wish her access either. People like her don't fall apart overnight. They rebuild fast, faster than we think, but not always wiser. The difference this time is, she'll have to do it without me propping her up from the shadows. As for Mom, I think that note was the most she could offer. Maybe she thought silence was safer. Maybe she thought love meant avoiding hard truths. Maybe she just wasn't capable of saying more. Whatever the reason, I no longer carry the weight of waiting for her to say it right. She tried. and I've let that be enough. This morning, I walked to the cafe around the corner and sat by the window with a book I never opened. The light poured in at an angle that made everything seem soft. I sipped my coffee slowly and watched people pass by, without feeling like I needed to be anywhere else. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the absence of performance. Sometimes it's the quiet you choose, not the quiet you endure. Before I end this story, I want to say something from the heart, especially to those of you watching who felt unseen in your own family, unheard in your own home, or unvalued despite everything you've given. Here's what I've learned. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's strategy. But there comes a point when silence is no longer noble. It's erasure. And no one should be erased. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need a spotlight to have worth. And you certainly don't need to prove your story to those who've already decided not to hear it. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Not to win the fight, but to stop being part of one that was never fair to begin with. So if you're at a crossroads, wondering whether to speak up, step out, or simply stop chasing validation, this is your sign. Take your space, write your version, and don't apologize for building something better than what broke you. Now let me ask you, have you ever been pushed to the edge by the very people you once protected? Have you ever had to reclaim your worth quietly, in a way no one saw coming? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to hear your story. If this video touched something in you, comment with a 1, or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Tell me why. Let's talk about it. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, please hit that subscribe button. There are more stories coming, real ones, quiet ones that fight with truth, not noise. Thanks for spending time with me today. See you in the next story.
Hello, I'm Alaris. For 16 years, I built my family's company from the ground up, quietly, consistently, without asking for credit. And then, one evening over dinner, my father handed my reckless brother the keys to a brand new company truck and smiled like it meant nothing. He said, "Not everyone has your natural talent." That was supposed to be a compliment, but it felt like the softest slap I'd ever received. No partnership, no promotion, just a card about humility and an old rusted truck that barely started. 1 week later, the same people who overlooked me were begging me to come back. What changed? Or was I just the only one who ever held the place together? Would you have stayed? Kenton's birthday had always been something of a spectacle, never subtle, never quiet. That year was no exception. I had just finished rearranging the chairs in the conference room to accommodate the extra guests when I realized I'd done it again. Showed up early, took care of the details, stayed invisible. It was the same room where I'd pitched 3 logistics overhauls that had kept us alive during the worst quarters. The same space I'd scrubbed by hand the night before our first ever regional contract signing. But tonight, none of that mattered. My brother walked in an hour late, wearing a new jacket he probably hadn't paid for, with that boyish grin that somehow still worked on everyone in the room but me. And like clockwork, people clapped. Some even stood. I sat at the far end of the long table. It was a seat I didn't fight for anymore. Let them have the head of the table. I knew who made this company move. Dad stood up, drink in hand, eyes on Kenton like he was looking at his own reflection 20 years ago. "This kid," he started, "has come a long way. I know it hasn't been easy, but no growth ever is." I felt my jaw tense. I stared down at the linen napkin I'd folded earlier that afternoon. "He's got heart. He's got passion," Dad continued. "And he's earned something special." That's when he pulled out the key ring. A silver company logo keychain shimmered under the room's soft lights. A new Ford truck key dangled from it like a medal. The room burst into claps before Dad even said the words. "Kenton, the new company truck is yours." That moment, sharp and surreal, cut through me faster than I could register. I kept my face still, smiled faintly. My fingers stayed wrapped around the stem of my wine glass so tightly, my knuckles paled. Kenton smirked. "Seriously?" he said, grabbing the keys, already flipping them in his hand like it was some toy. I thought we were leasing that one. Dad laughed. Not anymore. We figured you'd need something newer, more reliable. Image matters when you're heading into client meetings. Image. That word scratched at me. The same week, my truck had stalled 3 times, once in front of a hospital, twice while idling in the warehouse lot. But hey, at least I had natural talent, right? After the cake had been cut and Kenton soaked up every last compliment, I stood to help clean. As I passed behind Dad, he reached out and gently tugged my arm. Hey, come here, he said, leading me toward the hallway. He looked proud, relaxed, like he had just orchestrated the perfect family moment. You good? Sure, I lied. He handed me a small white envelope. Didn't forget about you. Inside was a card, embossed, subtle gold print. I opened it, expecting maybe a gift card or a thank you bonus, something tangible. Instead, it read, You don't need rewards. Your strength is your humility. You've always been our anchor. Love, Dad. I closed it slowly, blinked once. Pretty words, I managed. You know you're the one who holds this place together, he said, leaning in to hug me. We just want Kenton to feel like he's contributing. So the truck is motivational? He chuckled. He's trying, Alaris. He's not you, but he's trying. I stood there for a moment, letting the hug hang in the air longer than I wanted. I nodded. Thanks. What I didn't say was, this wasn't about the truck. It wasn't about feeling better than Kenton. It was about the math of it all. 16 years. No equity. No credit. No room in the speech. That drive home hit differently. My truck rattled like an old coffee can someone had kicked down a gravel road. Each bump, each metallic squeal, sounded like a laugh in my face. I gripped the wheel with both hands, eyes fixed ahead, even though I couldn't stop replaying Dad's smile. The applause, the absence of my name in that toast. It wasn't the first time I'd been overlooked, but it might have been the first time I really saw it. I passed through downtown Spokane. Lights from restaurants flickered past. Couples were sitting near windows, laughing over wine or burgers. It reminded me I hadn't had a night off in weeks, maybe months. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I ignored it. Probably Kenton texting some joke about his sweet ride, or Mom telling me how much that night meant to the family. When I got home, I sat in the driver's seat longer than I meant to. The dashboard lights dimmed. The familiar blinking of check engine glowed soft red. The battery gauge dipped again. I finally grabbed my phone and unlocked it. There it was, the link I'd saved 7 months ago and ignored ever since. Operations Manager, Brighton Logistics, now hiring. I stared at it, not because I was planning to apply, not yet, but because something in me had shifted. A sliver of myself I hadn't heard from in years whispered, They won't change. Not for you. Not ever. And I listened. That link sat on my screen like a silent dare. I didn't click it, not yet, but it stared back at me through that dimly lit dashboard like it was waiting. I shut the screen, shoved the phone into my bag, and leaned back in the seat, letting the cold hum of the engine remind me how far I hadn't come. 16 years in this business, and my greatest reward was a note about humility and an engine that coughed like a dying animal. The next morning came too soon, like it always does when sleep is poisoned by disappointment. I made my coffee, skipped breakfast, and pulled my hair back in a tight bun like armor. I didn't bother checking my messages. I already knew what they'd say. Some version of, "Wasn't Kenton great last night?" Or, "So happy to see the family all together." The office building was quiet when I arrived, just after 7. I liked it that way. Before people filled the halls with excuses and fake grins. I swiped in, past the front desk without a word, and slipped into the small conference room where today's presentation would happen. I clicked on the projector. The new dashboard was up on screen already. My dashboard. I had worked on it for months, dozens of sleepless nights optimizing routes, cutting delivery times, integrating live GPS tracking. This was the backbone of our entire quarter's efficiency. Without it, we'd fall behind, again. I skimmed the slides to make sure nothing had been changed. Visually, it looked the same, but then I saw it. In the bottom left corner of slide 2, lead strategist, Kenton Marshall. I blinked twice, stared harder. Maybe I had misread it. Nope. His name, not mine. Not even team effort. Just him. Like he'd designed it, coded it, and sold it himself. People started to shuffle in. Some nodded at me politely, like I was a helpful intern who made great coffee. Kenton breezed in 5 minutes late, his shirt untucked under a blazer, like some tech startup dropout. He didn't even look at me as he tapped the keyboard, queued up the slides, and cleared his throat. "All right, let's walk through what I've been working on," he said. I didn't say a word. Not when he fumbled basic metrics I'd written. Not when he took credit for automations I spent a weekend perfecting. Not when Dad, sitting 2 seats away from him, nodded with pride. When the lights came back on, the room clapped like trained seals. I walked out before anyone could see my face. I didn't go back to my office. I stepped outside into the alley between our building and the bakery next door. The smell of burnt bread and sugar filled my lungs, grounding me. I pulled out my phone, not to look at that job link again, but because I needed something to hold that wasn't my pride cracking open. At lunch, Mom invited me to the house. "Just a small thing," she said. "Come by, honey. It'll be casual. I'll make your favorite." I went. Not because I wanted to, but because it was easier than explaining why I didn't. Their kitchen still smelled like lemon pledge and chicken broth. Everything in that house was the same, except me. I'd shrunk a little since last week, not in body, but in presence. Kenton showed up with Zadie, his 6-year-old daughter. She rushed to hug Grandma, then skipped over to me. "Hi, Auntie," she chirped. "Hi, Sweet Pea," I said, managing a smile. She tugged my hand toward the front window where the new truck sat parked in the driveway. "Uncle Kenton says this one's gonna be mine someday." The room laughed. Zadie beamed with pride. I blinked. My mother clutched her mug tighter but said nothing. The chicken was overcooked, the salad too wilted, and I chewed each bite like it might fight back. No one asked about the dashboard. No one noticed the blood under my fingernails from clawing at silence. Later, I stood in the kitchen alone, rinsing my plate. Mom joined me. She handed me a dish towel. "You okay?" "Sure," I said. Zadie didn't mean anything by it. Kids repeat things. I know. She didn't look at me when she said, "Your brother's trying." That presentation meant a lot to him. I turned, drying my hands. "Did you know my name was taken off it?" She froze, then recovered too quickly. "I'm sure it was a mistake." "Was it?" Silence. "I'm not mad he got the truck," I continued. "I'm mad that somehow everyone's decided I don't need to be seen anymore." Mom's voice softened. "You've always been strong, Alaris. Kenton. He needs encouragement. You don't. So being competent means I don't deserve acknowledgement?" She opened her mouth, closed it, patted my arm. "Let's not do this now. Just enjoy lunch." I didn't speak for the rest of the visit. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open. The dashboard file was still there. I clicked it. Opened the Properties tab. Created by A.M. Modified by A.M. Every entry, every update, mine. I stared at my name in that metadata like it was graffiti on a wall I used to own. I whispered to no one. They can erase the title, but not the truth. And truth, I was about to learn, can be its own kind of weapon. I didn't come back to argue. I came back to prepare for the next move. That night, after leaving the file open on my laptop, I made myself a sandwich and sat in silence at the kitchen counter. I chewed slowly, not because I was savoring anything, but because I was rehearsing in my head, running timelines, recalling meetings, trying to piece together how long this had been happening behind my back. The next day at the office, I stayed later than usual. I waited until the last person had packed up and the halls had emptied out, their voices fading down the stairwell. The late spring dusk had turned the windows to mirrors, and my own reflection kept catching me off guard. Tight mouth, tense jaw, tired eyes. I pulled up the shared server files to double-check the pitch deck we were sending out for a new delivery network partnership. I was organizing final slides for the client-facing proposal. We were supposed to present on Thursday, and I wanted to make sure everything was airtight. That's when I saw it. The finalized contract, already filed and signed. I hadn't been told it had gone through. Worse, my name wasn't on it. No prepared by, no reviewed by. Nothing. Just a heading. Lead negotiator, Kenton Marshall. I stared at the screen, willing the letters to change. Then I scrolled. Every page had his name. Every bullet point I had personally crafted, every schedule I had cross-checked, now carried his initials at the bottom like some twisted watermark. At first, I thought it might have been a system error. Maybe they used the wrong template, but I knew better. I clicked over to my email. Sure enough, there it was. A short message from Lacey, the admin who'd been with us for only 4 months. Hi, Alaris. Kenton said you'd handled the prep, but that he'd be the final face on this one, per the owner's wishes. Just wanted to make sure everything aligned with their directives. Let me know if anything needs revising. L. Per the owner's wishes. Meaning Dad. He had let this happen. No. He had orchestrated it. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned, like realizing someone switched your medicine with sugar pills. You're not dead, not hurt, but you've been betrayed in a quiet way. In a way that keeps you alive long enough to watch the damage grow. I opened the older versions of the document, digging through the drafts like a detective at a cold case board. Version 1, me. Version 2, still me. Notes in the margins, edits tracked, slides I'd built, charts I'd formatted. Kenton hadn't added a single thing. In fact, version 4 had a note from me in the comments. Kenton still hasn't reviewed. Follow up next Monday. I took screenshots, saved the files separately, uploaded them to my personal drive with a new label, for when they deny it. Because I knew that's what would happen. They wouldn't admit to anything. They never had. Everything that happened in this family business was always just a misunderstanding, or worse, a decision made in the best interest of the company. That night, I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I walked the office slowly. The hall lights had dimmed. Most people had gone hours ago. My heels echoed as I passed the main hallway wall, the one we called the legacy line. It had framed photos of company milestones. The first van Dad ever bought, the warehouse lease signing, a black and white of Kenton and I as kids, holding wrenches too big for our hands. That one had always made me smile. But tonight, there was a new plaque up. Strategic Growth, Kenton's Vision. A photo of him in front of a whiteboard, sleeves rolled, pointing at a cluster of numbers I'd organized. The caption underneath praised his forward-thinking leadership in securing the company's future. I stared at it for a long time, not with jealousy, with grief, because I finally saw what this was, not favoritism, not oversight, erasure, intentional, deliberate. I left the hallway and slipped into the storage room. It still smelled like cardboard and toner. I opened the steel cabinet in the back and pulled out a binder labeled Q1 Contract Templates, 2021. My name was in those pages too. Drafts, contacts, vendor lists. I hadn't imagined my contribution. It was there, printed in black ink and timestamps, but no one would ever see it unless I forced them to look. And I was starting to think, maybe it was time to force it. I gathered the printouts I'd made, annotated versions of the pitch deck, including side-by-side comparisons of the edits Kenton never made. I clipped them together, walked toward the main conference room, and stopped at the door. The lights were still on. Kenton's jacket was hanging over a chair. Of course, he'd left it. He always did. I walked in, laid the packet in the center of the table, reached into my purse for a sticky note, wrote just 4 words. You forgot the truth. I placed it gently on top of the stack, adjusted the angle slightly, then turned off the lights. As I locked the building behind me, I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. But I did feel clear. This wasn't about respect anymore. It was about reclaiming my name. And one more came sooner than I thought. It was barely 8 a.m. when the front desk rang me. I was still nursing a half-finished coffee and mentally preparing to spend the morning reviewing inventory updates when they patched the call through. Hi, Alaris. Dispatch is reporting a delay on Route 6. Deliveries haven't left the dock, and the driver's confused by the rerouted schedule. I closed my eyes and inhaled. Where's Kenton? We've called, but no response. You're still listed as the escalation contact. Sorry. Of course I was. Without saying more, I grabbed my coat and walked briskly down to the operations floor. The smell of copier toner and stale vending machine snacks filled the hallway. By the time I stepped into the logistics hub, I had already started recalculating times in my head. Bobby, one of the senior drivers, was pacing near the door. "Morning," I said, setting my coffee aside. "Give me 5. I logged into the dashboard I had designed, adjusted the dispatch windows, updated the estimated route times, and resent the delivery orders to the fleet. "Done," I told him. "The system will ping you in 10. He nodded, slightly relieved. "Thought we were going to lose that window with Pacific Coast Foods." I didn't respond. There was no point in confirming what we both knew. Later that day, I found out the contract Kenton had been managing nearly got pulled. A miscommunication in loading times had led to a $50,000 near miss. If I hadn't stepped in, it would have cost us one of our longest-standing clients. But did anyone say thank you? No. Not an email, not a nod, not even a good catch. I went back to my office, sat at my desk, and stared at the framed certificate on my wall. Outstanding Operational Excellence, 2016. The last year I'd received any formal recognition. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't storm down the hall. Instead, I opened a fresh document, titled it Final Notes, and started logging every incident they thought I'd forgotten. By evening, I had a call from Mom. "Dinner's at 6:30 tonight, sweetheart. Just the family. Casual." I wanted to say no, wanted to lie and say I was stuck in meetings, but something in me, curiosity, maybe spite, said yes. I arrived at the house at 6:25 sharp. The driveway was packed. Dad's SUV, Kenton's shiny new truck, and 2 extra cars I didn't recognize. Inside, the smell of baked ziti and garlic bread tried to trick me into thinking this was another warm family evening, but I'd lived in that house long enough to know nothing was ever just dinner. Vera greeted me at the door with a kiss on the cheek and a too-bright smile. "You look tired." "I am." Everyone was already seated. Kenton had taken the seat at the end of the table, Dad's old spot. No one questioned it. He laughed loud, told a story about his daughter spilling apple juice on his laptop, and everyone howled like he was on stage. I sat quietly, buttered my bread, nodded at the right places. Then he dropped the line. "So yeah, Pacific Coast Foods almost canceled, but I jumped in, fixed the routing, got them back on schedule." I lowered my fork. "Actually," I said, voice even, "I was the one who fixed the routing. Dispatch called me when you couldn't be reached." Silence. Short. Cold. Kenton blinked, then smirked. "Oh. I thought you just double-checked the final numbers." Vera, without missing a beat, lifted her wine glass. "Let's not ruin the mood. It's Kenton's night." Just like that. My mouth went dry, but I kept my voice steady. "It's not about the mood, Mom. It's about the truth." She waved her hand, dismissing me like a mild draft. "Sweetheart, you don't need credit for everything. You know your worth. That should be enough." That line, that damn line, it hit harder than any slap. Kenton leaned back in his chair, looking smug. "We're all working toward the same goal, Al. Let's not get petty." Petty. I stood up, slow, intentional. I don't need a spotlight, but I also won't be a ghost. Nobody said a word, not Dad, not my cousin sitting next to Kenton. Not even Vera, who simply kept slicing her lasagna like I hadn't spoken at all. I left my plate half-finished, excused myself quietly, and walked toward the kitchen to rinse my hands. Vera followed. "Don't do this," she said, voice low. I turned. "Do what?" "This need for attention. You've always been strong, Alaris. Not everyone's built like you. Kenton, he's sensitive. He needs to feel seen." "And I don't?" I said. "Because I handle things quietly? I don't get to be acknowledged?" "You're the backbone. That's a compliment." "It's not a compliment if it means being invisible." She sighed. "You always take things so personally." That's when I realized she wasn't going to get it. She wasn't going to see the slow erasure. She'd convinced herself that harmony was worth the sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was me. I left without dessert. In the car, Headlights cutting across the quiet road home, I spoke out loud to no one. "One more time," I whispered. "Just one more." I didn't know if it was a promise or a warning. The moment I told myself one more, I hadn't realized how soon it would come knocking. It was Sunday night, almost 10 p.m., and I was standing in the laundry room folding towels when my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first. Everyone important knew I didn't pick up late on Sundays unless it was an emergency, but it kept buzzing, 3, 4 times. I finally wiped my hands, picked it up, and saw the name. Dispatch. I answered, expecting the worst. "Hi, Alaris. Sorry to call. We know it's late," the young woman on the other end said, already apologetic. "The warehouse is locked up for the night, and we just got word the route update for tomorrow's West Side medical supply run is incomplete. Kenton hasn't replied to emails since Friday." I stared at the open dryer like it had answers. "Is my name still attached to the emergency override access?" "Yes, you're still listed in the internal admin table." Of course I was. I grabbed my laptop from the kitchen, logged in through the back-end portal I had built myself 3 years ago, and found exactly what I expected. The schedule was half filled, the addresses mismatched, and there were no contact numbers uploaded for hospital security. I fixed it in under 12 minutes. After sending the final schedule to all 5 drivers, I logged out, shut my laptop slowly, and stared at the dark window. That was it. Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The sun had barely made it over the horizon, and the parking lot was mostly empty. I parked in my usual spot, farthest from the entrance, out of habit, and sat in the car for a few seconds, hands resting on the steering wheel. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. Inside, I went straight to my desk. No greetings, no coffee, no small talk. I pulled open the bottom drawer and reached for a small cardboard box I kept there, one I hadn't touched in years. I started filling it with the few personal items I hadn't already removed, a framed photo of me and our original 3-person crew from the company's first holiday season, a small cactus plant Kenton had once called "your weird desk thing," and 2 pens I liked too much to leave behind. Then I opened a new Word document. It wasn't long, just a simple resignation letter. Direct, professional, no drama. At 7:43 a.m., I printed it, signed it, and walked it down the hall. Dad's office light was off. I laid the envelope neatly in the center of his desk. By the time the rest of the office was alive and buzzing, I was already back at my desk clearing files from my computer. Kenton found me just after 9. He knocked once and strolled in like he owned the place. "Morning," he said casually, holding a to-go cup with his name scribbled on the side. I didn't look up. "What do you want, Kenton?" "I heard you dropped a letter on Dad's desk this morning." I said nothing. He tilted his head like he was studying an oddity in a museum. "You're not serious." I finally glanced up. "You think I'm bluffing?" He scoffed, half laughed. "Come on, Al. You always come back." I held his gaze. "Not this time." Kenton smirked. "This is about the truck, isn't it?" I stood slowly, not in anger, just certainty. "No, this is about being used like duct tape and expected to be grateful for it. You're being dramatic. And you're being predictable." I walked past him, out of the room and down the hall. I could feel eyes watching me, but no one said a word. At noon, Dad called me into his office. I closed the door behind me, sat down, and waited. He didn't even look up from his computer. "Is this about the truck?" I almost laughed, almost. "No," I said. "This is about 16 years of being overlooked, undermined, and erased. The truck was just the ribbon on the box." He finally looked at me then. "I didn't know you were this emotional." That line hung in the air like a sour note. I nodded slowly. "You mean human? I thought you had thicker skin." "Thicker than what? Your double standards?" He exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "This is why I didn't promote you. You personalize everything." That was Twist S8 in full force, blame disguised as leadership. I smiled, not out of humor, but because I was ready for this moment. "No," I said. "I just stopped swallowing what should have never been served." He blinked. I stood. "I'm not bitter, Dad. I'm just done." There was nothing left to say. He didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask if there was anything he could do to keep me, and I didn't expect him to. That evening, I returned to the office one last time, after hours, when I knew no one would be around. The hallway lights were dim, casting soft shadows across the old tile floor. I walked through each department like a silent observer, letting my memory catalog every space I had improved, every process I had streamlined, every broken thing I had quietly fixed without applause. I reached my desk, typed in my admin credentials, and began systematically revoking my own access, internal system logs, emergency overrides, database credentials, GPS syncs, all of it. One by one, I unhooked the wires they had refused to acknowledge I'd ever connected. Before shutting the laptop, I paused. There was a prompt blinking on screen. Confirm final logout? I whispered. Yes. Then clicked. As the screen faded to black, I took a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This wasn't revenge, it was release. On my way out, I left a small sticky note on the back of the main server monitor. It wasn't for anyone specific, but I knew someone would see it. It read, "Good luck running a system when you don't know who built it." I stepped outside into the warm evening air, the hum of summer crickets faint in the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. The first door didn't slam shut. It cracked open. 2 weeks had passed since I walked out of my father's company. 2 weeks without emails labeled urgent. 2 weeks without Kenton's chaotic schedules, Dad's passive-aggressive silence, or Mom's veiled attempts at keeping peace. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of the Spokane Civic Center, scanning the sea of booths at the local business expo, like someone who didn't know if she belonged. I had told myself I was only there to see what competitors were doing, not to get involved, not to make a statement, just observe. But as I wandered past a booth with poorly arranged pamphlets and a smoothie bar that had long since run out of ice, I heard it. Kenton's voice. And what makes our system revolutionary is its predictive optimization algorithm, fully integrated into delivery routing, real-time adjustment, and back-end reporting. I turned toward the sound, inching closer to the edge of the crowd surrounding his table, and there it was, my dashboard, my color palette, my layout. Even the sample data still included formatting quirks I had built to bypass internal errors. The title had changed, of course. Now it read, Kenton's Operational Model. I felt the familiar throb behind my eyes, but this time, I didn't look away. I listened. A woman in the crowd raised her hand. Can this adjust live reroutes if a delivery driver gets delayed en route? Kenton hesitated. He fumbled for the remote, clicked the wrong slide, and started rambling. Something about synchronization and flexible back-end tech, neither of which he understood. My feet moved before my brain told them to. I can answer that, I said, stepping forward. Since I designed it. There was a beat of silence, then a wave of whispers. Kenton turned toward me, his face pale and tight. You what? He asked, barely above a hiss. I smiled. The algorithm, the layout, the architecture of this model. I built it before you repackaged it. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I turned to the crowd. To answer the question, yes, it reroutes in real time, factoring delivery sequence, traffic conditions, and service window priorities. It also notifies the client if there's a significant ETA change. I didn't wait for applause, or questions, or stares. I simply walked away. Outside, I took a deep breath and let the sunlight warm my shoulders. I hadn't planned that moment. I hadn't rehearsed it. But it felt clean, necessary. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop. I didn't write a rant or call a lawyer. Instead, I created a single PDF. It was short, 5 pages. The first showed the original concept sketch with a timestamp from last year. Page 2, a screenshot of the internal build file history, all under my name. Page 3 listed the email thread approving the final specs. Pages 4 and 5. Screenshots of Kenton's version, nearly identical, just with new branding and his name replacing mine. No commentary, no accusations. I sent it from a private email account, anonymously, to the company Kenton had tried to impress. Marceline B., the CEO of a mid-size grocery delivery chain. Then I shut my laptop and made tea. 2 days passed. Then 3. No reply, no fallout, nothing, until Friday night. I was pouring wine when I saw the LinkedIn notification pop up. Marceline B. viewed your profile. I took a long sip and let a small smile form. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Marshall, would you be open to a short conversation about partnership potential? Marceline. I didn't respond right away. I let it breathe, let the silence speak for me for once. Back at the company, I imagined the fallout. A junior staffer likely reported the expo scene to Vera. Kenton probably spent the day barking orders and rewriting emails, frantic to regain control. I'd seen him spiral before. He didn't handle exposure well, and I hadn't even needed to shout. On Monday, a friend from accounting forwarded me a mass email Kenton sent to the whole company. Subject: Disruption of Company Image. While we appreciate everyone's efforts at the recent Business Expo, we must remember to represent Wilson Family Logistics professionally. External interference, regardless of former affiliations, undermines our mission. I didn't finish reading, because none of it mattered. The power wasn't in the noise anymore, it was in the receipts. What I'd sent to Marceline hadn't just exposed a lie. It showed competence, composure, and clarity. Truth doesn't always need a platform. Sometimes it just needs the right inbox. That night, I pulled out an old folder from the top shelf of my closet. Inside were files from years ago, client referrals, praise emails, improvement logs. I scanned them one by one, not out of nostalgia, but as confirmation. I'd built something real. And now, it would have my name on it. I wasn't looking to be reinstated. I was looking to be released. But now, they wanted both. When I woke up the morning after sending the letter to the board, I had nearly a dozen emails waiting. Some were quiet acknowledgments. A few were outright apologies, from employees who had watched the erasure but said nothing. And one stood out, from HR. Subject line: Let's talk. Urgent. I didn't reply. Not because I was avoiding the conversation, but because I wasn't ready to hear a defense built on desperation. I knew how these things worked. When people can't control your silence, they try to manipulate your re-entry. And I wasn't theirs to manage anymore. That Friday evening, I dressed in a black sleeveless dress that fit like certainty. Simple, structured, unapologetic. The invitation had come a week earlier, a corporate charity gala hosted by Wilson Family Logistics. The kind where people wear name tags over trauma and sip wine like it makes neglect taste better. I had debated attending at all, but something in me, not revenge, not pride, told me I needed to be seen, not for them, for me. I arrived just as the cocktail hour began. The ballroom was softly lit, the clink of glasses and cautious laughter filling the space. I scanned the room quickly, familiar faces, polite nods. Then I spotted Kenton. He was at the center table, surrounded by a half-circle of donors, suppliers, and people who called him visionary because he repeated phrases from books he hadn't finished. And sitting beside him, arms folded, smile stiff, was Mark, my ex. 5 years ago, we'd tried to build something. He couldn't understand why I prioritized work. I couldn't understand why he couldn't finish anything he started. It ended with him saying, "You'll always choose spreadsheets over people." And now, here he was, at Kenton's table. "Small world," Kenton said, loudly enough to carry across the room. I met his eyes. He smiled wide, leaned in toward Mark, and whispered something that made them both laugh. Mark looked at me, raised his glass, and mouthed, "Still intense?" I didn't flinch, didn't roll my eyes. I walked to the bar, ordered sparkling water, and nodded when the bartender offered lime. Later that evening, the lights dimmed, and the projector screen flickered to life. "This year," Vera's voice said from the podium, "we celebrate the evolution of our company, its legacy and future." Photos began to roll. The first delivery van, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, Kenton shaking hands with vendors, Dad holding a shovel at the groundbreaking of our new warehouse. Faces I recognized, rooms I had organized, systems I had built. But not once did my face appear, not even in the group shots I remembered standing in. And then came the leadership timeline, a sleek, animated slide moving through years, 2008 to 2023. Names, titles, promotions. Kenton's picture enlarged over and over. Vera's quote about nurturing family growth, a closing phrase across the screen. Guided by innovation, built on family. Applause erupted. I sat in silence. No one turned to look at me, except Mom. She caught my eyes and quickly looked away. Guilt, or discomfort, maybe both. Kenton lifted his champagne. To 20 more years of growth. And that's when something snapped. Not loudly, not with anger. It was the quiet shift of understanding that I hadn't just been excluded, I had been intentionally erased. I stood, walked out, and drove straight home. I didn't bother taking off my dress. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and began compiling every document I had: emails, memos, slide decks, strategic notes, photos with timestamps, each file dated, organized. By 1:00 a.m., I had over 60 attachments. I wrote a short, professional message and sent it to the board, BCCing Marceline, the same CEO who had once viewed my LinkedIn with quiet curiosity. Subject line: Clarification, ownership of operational legacy. I wrote, "To the board, it has come to my attention that recent internal and public materials have misrepresented key contributors to the company's strategic evolution. Attached, you will find a detailed log of project leadership history, verified documentation, and collaborative credits which reflect my role over the past 16 years. I ask for no title, no position, no correction, only that you understand I will not be erased from something I helped build with bare hands." Alaris Marshall. Then I hit send. The next morning, before I even finished my first coffee, I had 8 new messages, 4 from board members, 2 from mid-level staff who had been on teams I led, 1 from HR again, and the last, a voicemail from Dad. "I think we should talk." I didn't call back. That day, Kenton released a company-wide statement claiming technical oversight in the gala video and asserting that team achievements are more than individual spotlights. They called it a clarification. I called it too late. Some wounds never fully close. Some silences echo even after the noise is gone. But some endings, no matter how quiet, how sharp, how overdue, are necessary. It had been 3 weeks since the gala, 2 since I'd sent the letter to the board, just long enough for the dust to settle in all the places I'd left untouched, long enough for things to start unraveling on their own, like an old machine left humming long after its purpose had passed. Still warm, still ticking, but slowly beginning to break apart from the inside. I hadn't expected to hear from them again. Not really. I thought my letter would be my final word, a line drawn, firm and clear. No theatrics, no encore. But then came the text from Vera, short, formal, cold. "Your father is stepping down. He'd like you at the closing ceremony." No apology, no softness, just an invitation carved from dry wood and pride, an olive branch offered without sincerity, brittle and brittle-handed. Still, I said yes, not for them, and not for reconciliation. I chose a neutral place, a small cafe on the outskirts of town that hadn't changed in 30 years. The kind of place where the booths were sticky, the coffee came in chipped brown mugs, and the waitresses knew your name, but never your order. I arrived 10 minutes early. They were already there, Vera and Kenton, seated side by side like a painting someone had straightened for symmetry, not sentiment. They looked like a polite arrangement, not a partnership, not a team, just 2 people clinging to appearances. "Alaris," Vera said with a practiced nod, like I was someone she'd once heard about rather than someone she'd raised. Her tone was level, controlled, so tightly wound it sounded pleasant. Kenton didn't meet my eyes. He looked at my coat, at the space beside me, then finally mumbled, "You look busy." I sat down slowly, placing my hands in my lap. "You wanted to talk?" Vera folded her hands like she always did before rehearsed speeches. "We've been reviewing things," she said. "Kenton and I, along with your father, we believe some mistakes were made." I tilted my head slightly. "That's generous." She blinked but didn't flinch. "We'd like to offer you a seat back at the table," she said.
Not just as an employee, as a partner. Kenton added, equity, title, decision-making power. The offer hung between us, heavy with old dust. And the cleanup? I asked. You want me to come back and fix what's broken? Again? Vera didn't answer right away. Her lips pressed into a line, a tight, restrained response that said more than words could. You're not offering me power, I continued. You're offering me guilt, wrapped in a promotion. You're asking me to carry the weight of your mistakes so you can still control the narrative. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was revealing. I'm not angry anymore, I said quietly, but clearly. But I'm also not coming back. Then I stood up, calm, certain. When I left the cafe, I felt nothing but certainty. No hesitation, no resentment, just the steady thrum of my own resolve. That night, I sat at my desk with a cup of herbal tea and opened my personal archives, the old Google Drives, shared folders, projects buried under layers of renaming and repurposing. I didn't rush, I just moved through the digital past like clearing out an attic. I deleted what needed deleting, archived what mattered, revoked access, cleared permissions, deactivated admin credentials and internal tools I had personally coded into the Wilson infrastructure. I didn't destroy anything. I just removed myself. Entirely. If they wanted the machine to run, they'd have to learn how to build it themselves, or watch it fall apart. By the end of the week, I heard whispers, quiet murmurs from former colleagues, clients delaying payments, contracts being reconsidered, a few employees quietly searching on LinkedIn, posting vague updates like, exploring new paths. By Monday, the company website was offline. Scheduled maintenance, the banner said, but the timing spoke louder. I hadn't lifted a finger. Meanwhile, in a small office on the top floor of a building with peeling paint and honest sunlight, I was printing new business cards. Alaris Marshall, founder, Sable Ops Logistics. It wasn't a flashy firm. We didn't do viral launches or hoverboard brainstorming sessions, but it was mine. A quiet, deliberate space with white walls, living plants that didn't need too much light, and a team that understood two things, loyalty and competence. When we signed our third client, a company that had once been Wilson Family Logistics' flagship account, I didn't open champagne. I brought in warm cinnamon rolls from the bakery next door, left handwritten thank you notes at every desk, and scheduled a meeting to talk timelines and optimization goals. I didn't want fireworks, I wanted function. One afternoon, while reviewing invoices, a knock came at the door. I looked up. Marceline stood there, the CEO I had once emailed after the expo, the one who had nodded thoughtfully during my panel. She stepped into my office without ceremony. I thought I'd stop by in person, she said with a smile. We sat, drank 2 strong coffee in mismatched mugs, and spoke like equals. No one trying to dominate, no one trying to impress. At one point, after a pause, she said softly, "You were never invisible, Alaris. You were just too valuable to be allowed out of the shadows." I didn't reply right away. I let the weight of her words settle. "I'm not interested in being the loudest voice in the room," I finally said. "I just don't want to be talked over anymore." She nodded. "That's not a demand. That's leadership." By the time she left, she'd signed us to a long-term contract, not because I'd pitched perfectly, not because of my resume, but because I had finally stepped into my own space and stayed there. A week later, I was in my office after hours, reviewing documents by the low glow of my desk lamp, when a new email arrived. From Vera. Subject: ceremony. Body: your father's retiring next Thursday. There will be a small gathering. He asked if you'd come. No pressure, no apology, no promises, just another extension. I stared at the screen for a long time. Did I want to go? Not to be seen, not to cause a scene. Maybe for closure. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out an old plaque, the one I had once hung behind my desk at Wilson. Operations Director, 2017. I ran my fingers over the engraving. The corners were chipped, the brass faded. Then, without fanfare, I set it gently in the trash,
because titles mean nothing without truth, and I had finally learned how to stand in mine. I didn't go to reclaim anything. I went to see if I'd left behind something worth burying. The morning of the closing ceremony was brisk, that sharp edge of late fall in Spokane that always carried the smell of pine and endings. I pulled on a gray coat, nothing fancy, and made my way to the old Wilson family logistics building for the first time in nearly 2 months. The parking lot was only half full, a few familiar cars, a few I didn't recognize. The front door, once shining with pride and polish, now hung slightly crooked on its hinge, as if even the building had grown tired. Inside, the echo of my footsteps felt louder than I remembered. Reception was empty. No one at the front desk. A sign taped to the wall read, "Please proceed to conference hall. Final remarks, 10 o'clock a.m." I followed the hallway slowly, my fingers brushing the faded plaques on the wall. All the old Employee of the Quarter awards, most featuring people who had left years ago. The hallway smelled different now, like dust and cheap hand soap. Fewer lights were on, fewer people to light for, I guessed. The conference hall wasn't full, maybe 20 people total. Kenton stood near the podium, fidgeting with a stack of note cards. Vera sat off to the side, tight-lipped as ever. A young man I didn't recognize handed out programs. When he offered me one, I waved it off with a polite smile and took a seat near the back. There was no grand opening, no dramatic speech, just Kenton clearing his throat and tapping the mic. "Thank you for coming," he said, eyes flicking across the room. They landed on me for a second. No smile, no nod, and then kept moving. As most of you know, Wilson Family Logistics will be winding down operations over the next several weeks. My father has formally retired and, given recent shifts in contracts, we've made the difficult decision to restructure. I watched him stumble through his script. He tried to look composed, but even from the back, I could see the sweat forming at his temples. The pauses in his speech weren't for effect. They were stall tactics. "The truth is," he continued, "we've faced some challenges. Miscommunications, leadership transitions, mistakes." That word, mistakes, hung in the air longer than the others. I scanned the room. Most faces looked uncomfortable, tired, detached, like they were already mentally in a different job, a different building, a different life. Kenton wrapped it up with a mumbled thank you and a hasty exit from the mic. No applause, just polite shuffling as people stood, shook hands, and began drifting toward the exit. I stayed seated. Vera approached me a few minutes later. She looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in weight. Like holding everything together had taken more from her than she was willing to admit. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly, slipping into the seat beside me. "I wasn't either," I replied. We sat in silence for a few moments. She didn't say anything about the company, or about Kenton, or about my name being cut from 10 years of records. Instead, she reached out and gently touched my hand. "I hope you're happy," she said. "You look lighter." I turned to her. "I'm learning how to be." She nodded, then stood. "Take care of yourself, Alaris." "You too, Mom." She walked away without another word. After a moment, I stood, walked once through the empty office halls, past the warehouse doors, the mailroom, the break room that always smelled like burnt popcorn, and then I left. Back at my home, the heater had already kicked on. The house was quiet, warm, and clean. My new office, tucked into the corner of the living room, had everything I needed. A sturdy desk, my laptop, a shelf lined with files. On the desk sat a card from Marceline. Simple white stock, neat handwriting. "Thank you for building something that works because it's honest. We trust you, and your work shows why we should." In my inbox were 2 new contract approvals. I made tea, watered my succulents, and stepped onto the porch as the afternoon sunlight settled over the neighborhood. Across the street, a man climbed into a faded pickup truck. No custom rims, no company logo, just a good, solid machine. He drove off, engine humming like it was supposed to. I sat down in the old wicker chair I'd rescued from a yard sale, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and let the quiet settle. This wasn't a victory lap. It was peace, and peace wasn't loud.
Inside, my phone buzzed with a new message. I let it ring. I had nothing left to fix, nothing left to prove, just this moment, just this place, and maybe that was enough. They didn't lose me when I walked away, I thought. They lost me every time they refused to see me. I smiled, not wide, but real. I didn't need to win the family legacy. I became my own. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself after everyone else has taken what they needed from you. Alaris didn't seek revenge through noise. She let absence speak louder than anger. Have you ever stayed too long in a place where your value was ignored? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about quiet strength, family betrayal, and the moments that change everything. Hi, my name's Madeline. I spent $5,500 on Christmas dinner, private room, wine pairings, everything they asked for. That night, my whole family sent one group text. We need space. Don't contact us. No reason. No warning. Just goodbye. Then my sister messaged me directly, called me a walking ATM. They erased me from their lives. But they didn't stop using my name, my credit, my silence. And when I finally opened the files, what I found wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, dressed in blood ties. But what do you do when your entire family cashes you out, and you were the last to know? Christmas Eve in Seattle had always held a certain chill, but that night, the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the room. Queen Anne's most elegant Italian restaurant, with its mahogany booths and golden lights, was buzzing with holiday cheer. Families dressed in red and green, kids clutching candy canes, couples leaning in close over candlelight. I stood at the hostess stand, receipt in hand, confirming a reservation for 14, paid in full, $5,500, tip included. Right this way, the hostess said with a polished smile, as if she hadn't just seen my Amex tremble slightly between my fingers. I followed her to a long table tucked near the frosted window, close to the back exit. One of those spots restaurants reserve for guests who booked late or who didn't quite fit the mold. I set down my purse, straightened the chair napkins, and started arranging the menus for everyone. I knew the drill. For years, I had become the unofficial event coordinator of the Addams family, except no one ever called me that. I was just Madeline, the youngest, the quiet one, the one who could be counted on to pay for things, arrange things, make things happen, quietly. By 7:15, the others began to arrive. Callista, in her fur-lined coat and overly dramatic eyeliner, greeted the room like she owned it. My brother and his wife slipped in behind her. Mom and Dad followed, looking around as if trying to spot celebrities. "Hey," I said, waving from the corner. Callista's eyes swept over me. "Oh, you're here already." She sat at the center of the main table. Everyone else followed suit, filling the seats around her. No one sat near me. I was still at the overflow section, a side table meant for last-minute add-ons or the unwanted guest. I waited for someone, anyone, to ask me to scoot over. Instead, my brother laughed. "Looks like Maddie's running logistics again, just like always." I smiled politely. What else could I do? The waiter approached. I gave him the green light to begin the pre-selected wine pour, and he nodded, already aware of the details. I'd arranged it all weeks in advance. Appetizers, main courses, wine pairings, desserts for the kids, vegan options for Callista's new cleanse. Every dollar thought through, every choice made so they wouldn't have to. The evening unfolded like a play I'd seen too many times. Callista talked about her recent partnership with a lifestyle brand, mostly wellness, nothing too commercial. My brother shared some inflated story about a promotion that never happened. My parents beamed at them, laughed at their jokes. I listened, ate in silence, refilled their wine when the glasses got low. At one point, Dad stood up with a glass of red and tapped his fork gently. "Let's raise a toast," he said, "to family, for always being here, through thick and thin." Everyone clinked glasses. No one looked at me. By 10:30, dessert plates had been cleared. The waiter brought the bill, but I waved him off. It had already been settled. Still, no one mentioned it. Not a word, not a thank you, not a nod. It was as if the food and drinks had materialized out of nowhere.
As I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair, I glanced one last time at the table. My mother was scrolling through her phone. Callista was reapplying lipstick using her front-facing camera. I pulled out my own phone to call an Uber, but before I could tap the app, a notification buzzed in. Group chat. The Adams. Mom. We need some space from you. Please don't contact us for a while. I froze. Within seconds, Callista reacted with a string of confetti emojis. My father gave the message a thumbs up. The air in the restaurant grew heavy. The laughter from nearby tables sounded muffled. My ears started to ring, not from anger but from something colder. Numbness. I stared at the screen, reread the message. We need some space. Not let's talk. Not we're concerned. Just space. Don't contact us. No explanation, no context, no grace. I set the phone down on the white tablecloth, folded my scarf, and stood. Walked out through the side door, past the valet, past the doorman, past the lights strung around the patio heaters. Outside, the December air bit through my coat. The sidewalks were slick with rain that had frozen in patches. I clutched the dinner receipt in one hand, still folded from earlier. The paper was slightly damp from my palm. I glanced up at the lights of the Space Needle in the distance, twinkling above the city. Christmas Eve. I'd spent $5,500 for a seat at a table where I no longer belonged. And now, apparently, I wasn't even invited to the group text that included love. I looked down at the receipt again. The ink was starting to blur. So this is what $5,500 bought me, I whispered. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching headlights from passing cars flicker across the walls of my condo. The room was still decorated with holiday lights I'd hung out of habit. They blinked in rhythm, like a metronome counting down to the next blow. By the time dawn broke over downtown Seattle, I hadn't closed my eyes once. My phone was still on the nightstand, the last message from my family still glowing on the screen. We need space. Don't contact us for a while. I sat up slowly, my limbs stiff from being in the same position too long. I slid my feet into the slippers I'd bought myself last Christmas, the only gift I'd received that year, and walked to the kitchen. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want breakfast. What I wanted, more than anything, was to understand. No missed calls, no voicemails, no Merry Christmas texts from Mom. Just silence. That sharp, deliberate kind of silence that doesn't just sting, it screams. At 8:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. I flinched. For a moment, I hoped. Maybe someone changed their mind. Maybe it was Dad, or my brother. Maybe they realized how cruel that message was. But it wasn't. It was Callista. A private message. Honestly, Maddie, you're just a walking ATM. You pay, but you're always judging us. My thumb hovered over the screen. I read the message once, then again, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Walking ATM. That's all I was to her. My breath caught in my throat, not from shock, but from clarity. A clarity so sudden, so piercing, it was almost liberating. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and stared out over the rainy streets below. A city waking up to Christmas morning. Strangers hugging, laughing, carrying paper bags filled with gifts. And me, standing in silence, finally seeing my role in this family for what it truly was. Not the peacemaker, not the responsible one, not even the dependable youngest. Just the bank. It hit me all at once. Every dinner I'd hosted, every rent check I'd paid for my brother, every spa day I'd covered for Callista, every overdue electric bill I'd silently resolved for my parents. All those moments where I thought I was buying love, buying safety, buying a place in their circle. Turns out, I was only ever buying time. I needed to get out of that apartment. I needed air. I threw on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and walked a few blocks through Capitol Hill toward a nearby park. The wind whipped against my cheeks, numbing my face. The city was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that only comes once a year. Every step I took seemed to match the rhythm of a new thought forming in my mind. They didn't cut me off because I was harsh. They did it because I asked for something they weren't willing to give. Accountability. 6 months ago, I remember asking Dad about Grandpa's estate. It was a passing question, nothing confrontational. Hey, has there been any update on the will? I haven't seen anything since last year. He shrugged, barely looking up from his newspaper. Callista's handling it. I let it go then. I shouldn't have. Back at home, I powered up my old laptop, the one I used for personal documents. I logged into the shared family Google Drive. I hadn't checked it in months, not since the last vacation photo dump. I started scrolling through folders, photos, tax documents, recipe PDFs. Then I saw one labeled Trust Revised Final. My stomach dropped. I clicked. The document opened, and right there, on the front page, under Executor of Estate, was Callista's name, highlighted in red. I scrolled down. The original draft, dated the year Grandpa died, listed me as one of the beneficiaries, equal to my siblings. But in the revised version, my name wasn't there. Not once. Not in the assets. Not in the notes. Not even as a backup trustee. Erased. Not ignored. Not overlooked. Deliberately removed. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, the rain pattering softly outside, the holiday lights casting a dull glow over the living room. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that they took me out, or the fact that they didn't think I'd notice. What kind of people edit someone out of their family legacy and don't even bother hiding it? People who never saw me as family to begin with. I pushed the laptop away and stood up, pacing. My mind raced. This wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. Every check I'd written was a silent plea. Let me belong. Every bill I paid said, see me. Every holiday I hosted screamed, please let this year be different. But nothing changed. I opened a new spreadsheet. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I began to type. Total contributions to family, last 5 years, $1,200. Car repairs, Dad, $3,000. Back rent, brother, $6,750. Spa weekend, Callista, $2,200. Utility payments, parents, $5,500. Christmas Eve dinner, 2022. Line after line, I added every dollar I could remember. It was staggering, not just the total, but the frequency, the ease with which they had asked, the speed with which I had said yes. As the list grew longer, so did the pit in my stomach. They didn't love me, they needed me, there's a difference, and now, they didn't even need me, they'd moved on, found a new bank, or decided they could live without one. I closed the spreadsheet, saved it under a new folder called Evidence, and stared at the title. Evidence, not memories, not moments. Evidence, they wanted space. Fine, I'd give them distance they'd never close again. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the rain had turned into a mist, soft against the window. It was still Christmas Day, but the kind that didn't smell like cinnamon or roast turkey, just wet pavement and a gnawing ache in my chest. My coffee had gone cold. Again. I took a sip anyway. I couldn't remember the last hot cup I'd finished without interruption. I opened another document, not one for the numbers this time, just words. I needed to see them, not just feel them. They didn't forget me. They removed me. The sentence stared back at me like a final verdict. But it wasn't sudden. No, the distance didn't come overnight. They'd been peeling me away one event at a time, a quiet erasure dressed as oversight. Spring, 6 months ago. I remember sitting on my sofa with a bowl of takeout and scrolling through our family group chat. A stream of pictures had popped up. My nephew's graduation, cap, gown, the classic thumbs-up pose in front of the university seal. Proud of our boy, Callista had captioned it. My brother stood grinning next to him, arm around his shoulder. My parents, beaming, each holding a bouquet. Even Callista had shown up for the photo op, standing like she was part of the academic board. No one had mentioned it to me. I wasn't invited, not even notified. That might have stung less if I hadn't helped pay for it. $15,000, quietly transferred in 3 installments over 2 years. When my brother needed help, he'd called me, not the parents. You're the only one who understands financial planning, he'd said. And now, I didn't even rate a folding chair in the crowd. I remember hovering over the keyboard typing, Congrats, so proud of him. But then deleting it. What was the point? I wasn't part of the picture. I wasn't part of the story. I was just the silent donor behind the diploma. Fast forward to November. A white envelope arrived, hand-addressed. I smiled, until I opened it. The Addams family Christmas card. There they were. Mom, Dad, Callista, my brother, his wife, the nephew whose education I'd funded, and their golden retriever, Max. They were all dressed in matching sweaters, standing in front of a fake fireplace at some studio that specialized in holiday portraits. At the bottom, it read, "Wishing you warmth and joy, from all of us." All of us. Except me. I flipped the card over. Maybe there was a personal message. A note scribbled in by Mom. Nothing. Not even my name. I wasn't just missing from the photo. I was missing from the family. That realization didn't feel like a punch. It felt like slow frostbite. You don't notice it right away, but then you lose feeling, and when sensation comes back, it burns. That night, I didn't cry. I just poured myself a glass of red, sat by the window, and watched the neighbors string up their lights. A family across the street was decorating their tree, kids running around, arguing about ornaments. I couldn't hear the words, but the energy was unmistakable. Chaotic, imperfect, but present. I didn't want their chaos. I just wanted honesty, presence, something real. But real had never been part of our family brand. We preferred polish over truth, and I'd been complicit in that for years, paying for the shine, even as it dulled me. Then came Alex. We'd been seeing each other for about a year. A kind man, quiet, thoughtful, with a dry wit that took time to appreciate. He was a software engineer who loved classic vinyl and overwatered his houseplants. We met through a mutual friend and slowly built something that felt solid, not dramatic. Not fireworks, just a kind of companionship that felt possible. Until it didn't. He started pulling away, first in small ways, canceling plans with vague excuses, taking longer to reply to texts. Then one night, over dinner, he looked across the table and said, "I feel like you're always holding something back, like there's a wall I can't get through." I'd heard versions of that before. I asked what he meant. He hesitated, then added, "Your mom told me you're distant, like you use money to keep people from seeing who you really are." I blinked. "My mom told you that?" He nodded, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "It came up when she and I talked after your birthday dinner. She said she worries you don't let people in." That birthday dinner, I'd paid for it, cooked, cleaned. My mother hadn't brought a thing, and apparently, she'd brought her opinion instead. I nodded slowly, even as the inside of me broke a little more. That night, I didn't confront her. I didn't call him back either. Some walls aren't built to keep people out. They're built to stop the bleeding. Weeks passed. Alex drifted completely. We didn't officially break up. We just stopped, like a program left running until it crashed. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. These weren't accidents. They were patterns. Every time I edged closer to building something outside the family, someone would step in, not with care, but with sabotage dressed as concern. They didn't want me happy. They wanted me useful, and happy people get boundaries. Happy people say no. Happy people stop paying. They couldn't have that. So they pulled me back, through guilt, through silence, through carefully placed words behind my back. That's when I went to the back closet and pulled out the scrapbook I hadn't touched in years. It smelled like old paper and lavender, faint, but still there. Inside were pictures I never framed, letters I never sent, receipts from trips where I'd paid for everyone but was cropped out of every photo. It was a museum of my erasure. I ran my fingers over a photo of me at 16, holding my nephew when he was a baby. My eyes were tired, but I was smiling. Back then, I thought I was building something lasting. Turns out, I was just scaffolding for everyone else's story. I closed the book and placed it back in the drawer, locked it, walked to my laptop, opened a new folder. Evidence. Because I wasn't invisible, I was erased. I had closed the scrapbook and locked the drawer just before midnight. I sat there for a few more minutes, letting my breathing slow, feeling the silence in the room like it had grown legs and settled across from me. The apartment was dark, except for the soft blue glow from my laptop, still open, still waiting. I stood up, poured a glass of water, and was just about to turn off the lights when the knock came at the door. It wasn't a person, just a package. I bent down to pick it up, puzzled. No return address, just my name, handwritten in that blocky, unmistakable scrawl. My brother's. Inside was a stack of envelopes, bills, and notices, most of them unopened. One stood out, a thick letter from a mortgage company I didn't recognize. The words on the first page felt like a punch to the gut. Past due notification, joint loan agreement. Borrower, Michael Adams. Co-signer, Madeline Adams. I read it again, then again. Joint loan? My stomach tightened as I scanned the property address. It was their current home, the one I had visited once, back when they first moved in. The one with the blue shutters and the granite kitchen counters Callista had gushed about. I'd never signed anything. I sat back down, heart pounding, and logged into my credit report. There it was. Listed in plain sight, a mortgage account under my name, opened 18 months earlier. They'd used me. They signed my name. They used my credit. And they never told me. The next morning, I didn't even make coffee. I sat down at my desk, phone in hand, and called the lender directly. The call took over an hour. I was passed from one department to another, verified and re-verified, and finally, a soft-spoken woman named Carla read off the application file. Yes, Ms. Adams, your name is listed as co-signer. It was filed electronically. The application was submitted under a joint request, Michael Adams and Callista Adams. I didn't speak for a moment. And there's no signature from me? I asked quietly. Well, the signature is electronic, she said hesitantly. But yes, it was submitted from a verified IP address and device linked to your email. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at my screen. They forged me. Or worse, they'd had access to my old login from when I helped them refinance their first car years ago. Maybe they'd never changed the credentials. I opened a new document on my desktop and titled it, Fraud and Family, Where They Collide. Then, as if the universe wasn't done yet, 2 days later, I got a call from my bank. My credit utilization had spiked, something about a flagged transaction. At first, I assumed it was fraud, stranger fraud, the kind that comes from a hacked card or a skimmer at the gas pump. But when I pulled the report, it wasn't some anonymous thief. It was another card. Under my name, secondary user, $12,000 balance. I didn't even recognize the card number. When I called to inquire, they verified everything. Billing address, user profile, purchase history. It wasn't random. The primary cardholder, Callista. The purchases weren't hard to track. Nordstrom, Anthropologie, Restoration Hardware, even a weekend stay at a spa in Napa. I remembered that trip. She posted about it on Instagram. Treat yourself, she'd written, with a boomerang of champagne flutes clinking. I had no idea I'd footed the bill. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It just sits. It builds. It turns every warm memory cold, every thank you ever received into a retroactive lie. I had always been the financially stable one. I'd taken care of my credit, built my score like a fortress. I never asked anyone for a dime, not even when I was working 2 jobs after college to pay off student loans. And now, they'd turned me into their open bar. No, not even that. I was the spare key they never returned. The account they thought I'd never check. The silent engine that kept their lives running while they posted curated versions of themselves online. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, I did what I knew best. I documented every screenshot, every statement, every email and call log. I organized it into folders, color-coded by offense, mortgage fraud, identity theft, misuse of funds. I gave them so many chances to be honest. I let things slide for years. I excused oversight. I rationalized guilt-tripping as love. But this was premeditated. You don't accidentally sign someone else onto a home loan. You don't mistakenly use their name for a luxury card. You don't forget to tell your sister she's now financially entangled with your mortgage. This was theft with a family face. So I emailed an attorney I'd once helped with her small business taxes. Her name was Monica. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but I trusted her. Subject line: urgent, family fraud case. Body: I need help, and I have documentation. Then I picked up my phone and texted Callista directly. You crossed a line. Fix it now, or I will. I didn't wait for a response. I placed the phone face down, took a deep breath, and opened another tab. Search term: legal consequences of identity fraud, family member. Because if they thought I'd stay quiet just because we shared DNA, they hadn't been paying attention. By the time I finished typing Phase 1, freeze everything, the sun had started its slow climb over the Seattle skyline. I sat at my desk without moving, letting the quiet settle. Not the peaceful kind, more like the stillness before a storm. My hands rested on the keyboard, but my chest felt heavy, tight, like someone had stacked bricks on it while I wasn't looking. I glanced at the date on my screen. March 3rd, exactly 1 week before Mom's 66th birthday. I'd already paid the deposit on the restaurant weeks ago. An Italian place in Bellevue she liked to talk about but had never actually gone to. She'd mentioned it casually during one of our Sunday calls. You know, I've always wanted to try that place with the wood-fired pizzas and the wine wall. Seems fancy, though. I remembered how she said it, like a wish she hadn't meant anyone to grant. Of course, I took it as a cue. $1,950. 14 people. Private room. Wine pairings. Dessert course. Everything arranged. Every detail covered. And like always, no one offered to split the bill. No one even asked how much it cost. The night of the dinner arrived, and I showed up early, as usual. Checked in with the hostess, made sure the name cards were printed right. I wore a navy dress, simple, appropriate, nothing too flashy. By 7:15, the family had arrived. My brother and his wife were first, followed by Callista, who made sure to loudly announce she was so exhausted from filming content all day. Mom walked in last, linking arms with Dad. She looked nice, light pink blouse, fresh blowout. She lit up when she saw the room, eyes wide like a child. "Oh, Maddie," she said, "you didn't have to go all out." But that was all she said. Nothing more. No hug. No thank you. Just a brief acknowledgement before she turned to greet Callista. Dinner went as I expected. Callista dominated the table conversation, telling a story about how she got into a shouting match with a brand manager who didn't understand her aesthetic. Dad chimed in occasionally with gripes about politics. My brother mostly stayed on his phone. At one point, the waiter brought over a bottle of Brunello and offered to pour. Callista raised her glass. "To Mom," she said, eyes glimmering. "The backbone of this family." Everyone clinked glasses. Mom stood, glass in hand. "I just want to say how grateful I am to have all of you here tonight," she began. "Family is everything, and I feel so lucky to have kids who take such good care of me." She looked directly at Callista, especially Callista, who organized this whole evening. Callista smiled modestly. Everyone applauded. I sat still, the corners of my mouth fixed in a polite curve. I didn't correct her, didn't say a word, just lifted my glass, took a sip, and reminded myself to breathe. After dessert, I slipped out quietly. No goodbyes. Just a nod to the waiter and a signed receipt for the full balance, plus tip. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of numb routine. Work, groceries, laundry. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe Mom had just gotten confused, that maybe Callista really had made a few phone calls, and Mom had mistaken effort for execution. But then, on a rainy Thursday morning, there was a knock on my door. It was Mom. She was holding an envelope. "Sweetheart," she said, stepping inside like she owned the place. "We're a little tight this month, just until next paycheck. You know how it goes." I didn't ask for details. I didn't argue. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the checkbook, and wrote a check for $3,200. I handed it to her without a word. She smiled. "You've always been the responsible one." Then she walked out. I watched from the window as she got into her car. I saw her toss the envelope into the back seat without even looking at it. No care, no gratitude, just expectation. Her face, when she looked in the rearview mirror, was blank. Cold, not angry, not ashamed, just done with me, as if I were a clerk handing her a withdrawal. That image stuck with me the rest of the day. That night, I sat back down at my desk and opened the file I'd labeled Final Line. I added 2 new entries. March 10th, Mom's birthday dinner, $1,150 March 24th. Emergency check for bills, $3,200. Total so far. Too much, emotionally and otherwise. I stared at the list, the names, the dates, the numbers, and I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit until now. They weren't just ungrateful, they were strategic. They knew the buttons to press. The right blend of guilt and omission, the soft reminders of obligation, the subtle digs, the "you've always been the stable one," said like praise, but loaded like a weapon, and I kept letting them, over and over. Why? Because I wanted to be needed. Because being needed made me feel loved. Because the illusion of importance was easier than the truth of being optional, but not anymore. I closed the document and opened a new one. Title: Phase 1. Freeze everything. I typed the first step. Cancel all auto payments connected to their accounts. Second step: remove myself from shared utilities. Third: lock down credit reports. This wasn't petty. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. This time, I wouldn't warn them twice. I woke up that morning before the alarm went off. There was no sound outside, no email pinging, no buzzing texts, just the quiet that comes before something decisive, a different kind of silence than the ones they used to shut me out. This one was mine, controlled, chosen. I sat down at my kitchen table at exactly 7 o'clock a.m., mug of black coffee beside me, laptop already powered up. I had slept in workout clothes, not because I planned to exercise, but because they were the closest thing to armor I owned. 12 tabs were open across the top of my browser: banking, utilities, credit card dashboards, the family phone plan. All accounts I had managed, funded, or kept from falling apart over the years. Each one was a small anchor tethering me to them. Today, I was cutting every cord. I started with the auto-pays: water, gas, electricity, all billed through my credit card, all set to renew on the 15th. A few clicks, and the recurring payments were gone. One of the utilities prompted me, "Are you sure you want to disable automatic billing for this account?" Yes, I was sure. No warning, no announcements, just silence, like they taught me. Next came the shared family phone plan. 4 lines: mine, my brother's, my parents', and Callista's. I'd added them years ago when I qualified for a corporate discount and wanted to help cut their bills. They never once paid me back for their share. I called the provider. "I'd like to remove all secondary users on this account effective immediately. Would you like to notify them of the changes?" the rep asked politely. "No, thank you. They'll figure it out." I continued, steady and calm. Insurance policies, canceled. Streaming services, cut off. Old forgotten subscriptions tied to my cards, deleted. By 11 o'clock a.m., the spreadsheet labeled Phase 1, Freeze Everything, had every item checked off. At exactly 12:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Callista. "Hey, what's up with the Wi-Fi? Ours just cut out. Are you having issues too?" I stared at her message, not because I was surprised, but because of the entitlement packed into so few words. 12 minutes later, my brother texted, "Insurance isn't working. I got pulled over and they said the policy doesn't show coverage. What's going on?" I didn't reply. 15 minutes after that, Mom called, twice. Left a voicemail the third time. "Madeline, did you forget the electric bill again? The power's acting weird. I told you last month not to cut it so close." I closed the message without listening to the rest. Instead, I went back to my desk, opened the spreadsheet, and typed in bold, Phase 1, complete. The only sound in the apartment was the soft clicking of my keyboard. Each keystroke felt like regaining a piece of myself I hadn't realized I'd given away. By mid-afternoon, I changed into a blazer and headed across town to a small law office just east of Capitol Hill. Monica, the attorney I'd emailed 2 days earlier, greeted me at the door. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but when she saw me, she didn't ask unnecessary questions. She knew I wasn't here for tea. We sat in her office, surrounded by towering shelves of tax codes and binders labeled with color-coded tape. "I read through your documents," she began, flipping open a manila folder. "Mortgage co-signing without consent, fraudulent credit card use. They're both prosecutable offenses." I nodded once. "I'm not suing my family. I'm suing the people who forgot I was family." Her gaze softened. "You're doing the right thing, Madeline. The emotional part might sting, but this is about protecting your future." We signed the forms, filed the paperwork. And just like that, the narrative shifted. I wasn't just the responsible daughter anymore. I was the plaintiff. On the walk home, I stopped by a small coffee shop on the corner, ordered an iced tea, sat by the window, and watched the street for a while. Outside, people rushed by with purpose, jackets zipped, heads bowed against the wind. I used to move like that, quiet, unassuming, invisible. Now, I was choosing a different pace. That evening, Callista posted a new story to Instagram. It showed a photo of a candlelit bathtub, captioned, "Some people can't handle boundaries." Sad when family turns on you. I laughed out loud in my kitchen. Boundaries. Callista had never met a boundary she didn't bulldoze. I took a screenshot, saved it in a new folder titled Image Management, then closed the app. The more she tried to control the narrative online, the easier it was to document the lies. My phone buzzed again, a string of missed messages. Some were from my mother, questions disguised as guilt. Some from my brother, accusations laced with indignation. And Callista's, of course, mixed between passive-aggressive comments and outright insults. I didn't read any of them. I didn't need to. They weren't communicating. They were reacting, panicking, because the ATM was no longer operational. I spent the rest of the night on my porch, wrapped in an old blanket, sipping hot tea. The city lights stretched out before me, flickering through the mist. I could hear the hum of traffic, the occasional siren in the distance, but here, in this moment, I felt still. Not quiet like before, not ignored, still, like a foundation being rebuilt after demolition. My phone screen lit up again. 10 new notifications. I turned it face down and whispered into the air, almost amused. That was only phase 1. The morning after I'd shut everything down, I woke up to find the world had already started unraveling without me lifting another finger. I didn't feel triumphant, just clear. Detached, maybe, but not numb. Clarity has a way of making things sharper, not softer. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Brianna, a friend of a friend, someone who followed Callista on Instagram mostly for the drama, not the content. She'd sent me a screenshot of a post that had just gone viral, courtesy of a new anonymous account called Truth Teller Fam. The post was simple but devastating, 2 images side by side. On the left, a glossy photo of Callista in a spa robe, glass of champagne in hand, captioned, "Hard work deserves hard rest, #blessed, #grind culture." On the right, a screenshot of a credit card bill, with my name at the top and the same spa listed as a $1,287 charge. The caption read, "Wonder who really paid for your hard-earned self-care." Within an hour, the comments section had exploded. Some defended her, most didn't. "That card ain't yours, sis. Must be nice to rest on your sister's back." So this is what family loyalty looks like now? Callista disabled comments by 10:17 a.m. By 10:23, the post was gone altogether, but the internet doesn't forget. I sat at my kitchen counter, quietly watching it unfold. I didn't share it, didn't comment, didn't like. I didn't need to. They had done it to themselves. That afternoon, the family group chat blew up. I hadn't checked it in weeks, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it just in time to see Callista typing, 3 dots blinking in furious rhythm, before she finally sent, "Madeline, this is disgusting. You're dragging me publicly. Really? Over what? A few spa days? A few spa days. That charge alone would have covered groceries for a struggling family of 4 for a month. But sure, A few spa days. Before I could type anything, my brother chimed in. You've lost your mind. You could have just talked to us like an adult. Like an adult? As if I hadn't spent years talking, quietly, calmly, asking, explaining, paying, covering, absorbing. I took a breath, typed slowly. I paid for that mind, remember? You all rented it with guilt. Then I hit leave group. Just like that, the thread disappeared from my screen. No more incoming attacks disguised as concern. No more obligation to reply. No more mental rent owed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees outside my window, I stood at my kitchen sink, rinsing out a cup, when a memory hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter. 2 months earlier, I'd ended up in the ER with what I thought was food poisoning. Turned out to be appendicitis. I was admitted overnight, hooked up to fluids, and told I might need emergency surgery if things didn't improve by morning. I texted the family group chat. Simple. Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm in the hospital. We'll update when I know more. Silence. 12 hours passed. Nothing. By hour 36, my phone finally buzzed. It was Callista. Sorry. Been crazy busy. Let us know if you need anything. Need anything? Just acknowledgement would have sufficed. A phone call. A voice. I didn't reply then. I never brought it up. Because I knew the truth even before that hospital room. They always showed up when they needed something. Not when I did. Back in the present, I walked over to the window, phone in hand, and stared out. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the screen was still. No notifications. No demands. No guilt bombs wrapped in checking in. I opened my contacts, deleted one name after another. Mom, Dad, Michael, Callista. Each deletion felt like pulling a splinter, long overdue. When I finished, I set the phone down and exhaled. You were never really there to begin with, I said aloud. Not to the phone, not to the air, to myself. Because that truth had sat just beneath my skin for years, waiting to be spoken. That night, I printed out the full documentation Monica and I had built over the last few weeks. Proof of fraud, the misuse of my financial information, screenshots of messages, spreadsheets of unacknowledged payments. I clipped the documents neatly into a binder, slid it into a case, and carried it over to my desk. As I passed by the mirror in the hallway, I caught my reflection. I paused, met my own gaze. Not the face of a daughter, not a sister, not the dependable one, just Madeline, and that was enough. I leaned in slightly, not smiling, just steady. Next stop, court. Then, after a brief pause, let's see how strong their lies are under oath. I stood in front of the mirror a moment longer than necessary, the words I'd just spoken still lingering in the air. Let's see how strong their lies are under oath. My reflection didn't blink, didn't flinch. There was no tremor in my voice, no second-guessing in my gaze. That version of me, the one who apologized first, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who mistook guilt for loyalty, was long gone. The following day, Seattle's sky matched the mood I carried. It drizzled relentlessly, the kind of rain that soaked through your coat and into your bones before you realized you were cold. I'd been packing for most of the morning, taping boxes shut with quiet precision, sorting what I'd keep and what I'd leave behind. My condo was starting to look empty, not lonely, just cleansed. Around 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, huddled beneath a shared umbrella. My father looked thinner, his coat hanging looser on his shoulders than I remembered. My mother, mascara smudged under her eyes, stepped forward first. "Madeline," she said softly, like she was trying not to sound too desperate. I didn't speak. I didn't move aside. She began, voice cracking. "We're in a tough spot. The mortgage is behind. Utilities, too. We didn't know how bad it was until the past due notices started piling up." My father cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. "We're going to lose the house." I folded my arms. "I'm not your lender." Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch my arm. "You can't be serious about this. You're really going to turn your back on us? On your family?" My voice was steady. You turned your back on me a long time ago. You just didn't expect the bank to notice. The silence between us felt louder than the rain. I'm your mother, she whispered. No, I said gently. You're someone who needed a checkbook more than a daughter. She blinked rapidly, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. Maybe she hadn't. I stepped back into the apartment, walked to my desk, and returned with an envelope. I handed it to her. She looked down, confused. Slowly, she opened it and pulled out a check written for $0. Taped to it was a small yellow sticky note that read, "This is all that's left of my forgiveness fund." She didn't say a word, just stared. My father finally stepped forward, but when our eyes met, he stopped himself. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. They just turned and walked back toward the elevator, umbrella between them, my mother clutching the envelope like it might still turn into money if she held it long enough. The door clicked shut behind me. I stood there for a few minutes, breathing, not crying, not because I wasn't sad, but because the sadness had expired. It had ripened into something else, resolve. Later that evening, I opened my laptop and typed one last email to the family. Subject: Final disconnection. Effective immediately, I am no longer a participant in this family structure. Please do not contact me for any future personal or financial matters. Any attempts to communicate beyond this message will be handled through legal counsel. This is not an act of cruelty. It is a boundary long overdue. I hit send. There was no satisfaction, just completion, a full stop. The next day, Monica's office confirmed that court documents had been officially served to Callista and my brother's household. Fraud, credit abuse, misrepresentation. I didn't attend the delivery. That wasn't my role anymore. Let them be shocked. Let them spin. Let them post passive-aggressive quotes and cryptic captions. I wouldn't read them. I had blocked them all, scrubbed them from my digital life, cleared their fingerprints from every platform. I didn't need to scream. I had evidence, and silence louder than rage. That night, after packing my final suitcase, I booked a one-way flight to Santa Cruz. Nothing fancy, no big farewell, just a new destination and an old craving for peace. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of my condo one last time. The space that had held my breakdowns, my rebuilds, my spreadsheets of betrayal and folders of truth. I left the keys on the counter, no note attached. I owed no explanation. As I pulled the door closed, my phone buzzed with one last notification from a delivery app. An automated message asking if I was satisfied with my order. I chuckled. Satisfied? No. But finally free? Yes. Voice soft, almost amused, I whispered. They told me not to contact them. I finally agreed. The flight from Seattle had been quiet. Not the heavy, awkward quiet of tension or avoidance, but the kind that settles in when there's nothing more to defend. I didn't talk to the woman next to me. I didn't ask for snacks or ginger ale. I kept the window shade open and just watched. The clouds rolled by slowly, each one like a curtain drawn between who I had been and who I was becoming. No dramatic playlist in my ears, no rereading of old texts, just silence, space. By the time we landed in San Jose, the sun was low but steady, dipping just enough to warm the tarmac without burning it. No gray skies, no threat of rain, just light, the kind of light that felt honest. I found my rideshare outside baggage claim. The driver didn't say much beyond confirming my name. No small talk, no playlist, no unnecessary warmth. Perfect. We wound down Highway 17 as the sun began to dip behind the hills, turning the landscape gold, then blue. Trees blurred past the window in watercolor streaks. My reflection stared back at me, softened, quieter, unfamiliar in a way that felt new instead of wrong. Then I smelled it. Salt. The unmistakable shift in the air that tells you the ocean is close, that something is opening up. By the time we arrived at the cottage I'd rented, just a few blocks from the Santa Cruz boardwalk, the breeze had cooled, not cold, but clean. The kind of chill that wakes you up just enough to remember where you are. I stepped out of the car, key in hand, realtor's tag still dangling from the fob like a new chapter with a receipt. The cottage was small, no frills, one bedroom, white siding, a low porch, and wild rosemary lining the fence. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood there in the entry for a long moment. Hardwood floors, clean white walls, a tiny built-in bookshelf tucked beside a stone fireplace. It wasn't big, it wasn't luxury, but it was mine. No shared lease, no emergency contacts I hadn't consented to, no keys that belonged to anyone but me. The next morning, I walked to a small cafe near the wharf and ordered a black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just as it came. I took it to a bench that faced the water and sat, cup nestled between both hands, steam curling around my fingers. The gulls cried overhead. Joggers passed behind me. Somewhere, someone was playing guitar. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt still. No pings, no urgent calls or digital reminders of guilt, no unspoken obligations hanging over me like laundry lines. I wasn't waiting on an apology that wouldn't come. I wasn't waiting to be told I was being too sensitive. No one was watching for my reaction or holding out their hand for another favor. For once, no one was waiting on me, and I wasn't waiting on them. The bookstore happened by accident, or maybe, like all good things, it happened in the only way it could have. I'd wandered in one afternoon, looking for an out-of-print novel my grandfather used to read to me. I remembered the cover, cracked spine, soft corners, his voice trailing off when he got too tired to finish the final chapters. The woman behind the counter looked up as I entered. Late 60s, graying hair in a braid, reading glasses perched low on her nose. "You look like someone who's used to being talked over," she said. I blinked. Didn't respond, just nodded. "Well," she continued, setting her tea aside, "I run this place quietly. If you ever want a spot to disappear and still be seen, come back." I did. Within 2 weeks, I was covering the Saturday morning shift. Within 2 months, Mary Beth had cleared a corner behind the register and said, "That stool's yours now." She never asked about my past, never pried. She let me shelve books, host awkward poetry nights, and brew truly awful coffee for customers who didn't care. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in looking for a book for her grandmother. She was hesitant, fidgeting with her sleeves, like she thought the question itself might be wrong. I walked her to the right shelf, handed her a novel with a watercolor cover and a soft ending. Her eyes lit up. After she left, Mary Beth looked at me for a long moment. "You'd make a wonderful mother," she said. I didn't answer right away. "You remind me of my daughter," she added. Before I lost her, I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and whispered, "I never had a mother who saw me like that." She nodded once, didn't say anything more, but something settled between us that day, something honest, quiet, kind. In the cottage, I kept only one family photo. It sat on the mantel above the fireplace in a dark wood frame, just me and Grandpa. I was 5, holding a plastic shovel on the beach. He was kneeling beside me, smiling, sunburned, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. He was the only one who had seen me clearly, the only one who didn't measure my worth by what I could fix. He once told me, "You carry everyone, Maddie, but one day you need to carry yourself." It took me 32 years to understand what he meant. I stopped checking Callista's socials, didn't care whether the trial dragged on or disappeared in red tape. I heard whispers that my parents were staying with some cousin in Nevada, that my brother had picked up a second job to cover debts he couldn't explain, but I didn't investigate. I didn't chase down every loose end. I didn't need their closure. I needed my breath. Every night, I journaled by the fire, not always about them, sometimes just a note about what I'd noticed that day, the way fog rolled in off the cliffs at dusk, the hummingbird outside the kitchen window, the joke a stranger made in the grocery store that made me laugh without guilt. One night, I wrote, "I didn't lose a family. I lost a fantasy, an illusion I was told to chase until it broke me. And in its place, I found something better. I found peace, the kind that doesn't apologize for existing, the kind that doesn't demand interest." I signed it simply, Madeline, not the fixer, not the ATM, not the emotional insurance policy, just me. And that was enough. I didn't lose a family. I found myself. Sometimes, the hardest part of walking away isn't the silence that follows. It's realizing how long you stayed just to be used. Madeline's story isn't just about money. It's about self-worth, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to say, enough. Have you ever been treated like you only mattered when you gave something? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us how healing begins the moment we stop apologizing for protecting our peace.